This is a special meeting of the City of Morro Bay City Council. It is Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. It's 2 p.m. This meeting is being held via teleconference, and I'll ask the clerk if she could establish a quorum, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Addis.
Here.
Councilmember Davis.
I am present.
Councilmember Heller.
Here.
Councilmember McPherson.
Here.
And Mayor Heading.
Present. So we do have a quorum. I will call the meeting to order. And with the concurrence of council, since Mr. Casares has 2 items, if it would be okay to move item 5 to number 2, or right after number 1 to allow those to be taken in order, would that be okay?
Sure.
Great. Don't need to take a vote, just looking for head nods or okay.
Yes.
So we will do that. We will move item 5 to the second item and then the remaining items after that. This is a special meeting, so I will note that pursuant to Section 3 of the Executive Order N2920 issued by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, this meeting will be conducted telephonically through Zoom and broadcast live on cable channel 20 and streamed on the city website. Please be advised that pursuant to the executive order and to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that will spread the COVID-19 virus, the Veterans Hall will not be open for this meeting or for public comment. You may engage via Zoom and or you may call in. That information will be up on the screen. And I'll ask the clerk to go ahead and put that up if she would. You may call in or enter via Zoom, and I'm going to go ahead and open up public comment. This is public comment for items only on the agenda, as this is a special meeting. So with that, Anthony, first public comment, please.
Mayor, I do not. Oh, actually, Catherine Manning has raised her hand. Let me go ahead and unmute her.
Fantastic.
Okay, Catherine, you are live and unmuted, free to give your testimony.
Welcome, Catherine.
It looks like she is on a telephone. I wonder, let me...
Okay. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Catherine, are you there?
Oh, yes, I am here. I'm here by phone, but I'm not sure if I'm coming through the computer. So, yes, thank you for the opportunity to greet the council. My name is Catherine Manning with People's Self-Help Housing. I am a licensed clinical social worker serving in the Morro Bay area, along with another social worker serving on the 2 properties. Well, we have 4 properties out there. We have the Pacific View, the Sequoia Apartments, and then we have also the Ocean View and Ocean View Manor Apartments. We really appreciate the support of the council in helping us not only to have quality, affordable housing in the Morro Bay area, but I am speaking on behalf of the Supportive Housing Program. We have clinical social workers assigned to those properties that go in and provide an array of services to those on the site, such as we organize food programs, we organize medical types of services and outreach. We do one-on-one meetings. We help them access benefit programs, multiple benefit programs for discount utility programs, for rental eviction. Our services are in bilingual Spanish and English for the variation of the population that lives in that area. As you know, it's been an incredible, difficult time in regards to funding and people running into rent jeopardy. We've been able to have internal funds that we've been able to support people in rental assistance, but also accessing rental funds throughout the community, through community providers, through the stipend funds, through undocked funds, through various areas. So I just wanted to say hello and let let you know we really appreciate any support, financial support you can give to People Self-Help Housing and the Supportive Housing Program.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great work that your organization does. Very much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
And Anthony, next call.
Mayor, I do not see any raised hands currently.
Okay, I will go ahead and close public. Oops. And bring it back. And we will start with agenda item number 1. This is the Water Reclamation Facility Project Review and Approval of Change Orders. And I believe I'm turning it over to Mr. Casares, or maybe both Mr. Collins and Mr. Casares.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Eric Casares, the work program manager here. Let me go ahead and start my video and also get this presentation up here. Hold on really quickly. There we go.
Perfect, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for that. So again, thank you for having me here this afternoon to present on item 1, which is a review of potential change orders for the water reclamation facility. The recommendation here this afternoon is that City Council authorizes City Manager to execute Amendment Number 4 with Feedlots Black and Beach, the design build team, for a total value not to exceed $835,097. So I gave a similar presentation to the Public Works Advisory Board last week on this particular topic. And then we had a little discussion during last week's council meeting on this particular item. And so I wanted to, as we go through the presentation this afternoon, I will identify places where we received comments from PWAB, and then of course, as always, please stop me if you have any questions as we go through this. We start off all of these conversations about potential change orders just in the same way, because it's a little bit different than your maybe your conventional design bid build project. So a PCO is a potential change order. And where do these come from, and how do they get from essentially a concept to in front of you guys at a city council meeting? So it starts with the suggested change to the water reclamation facility and when that's identified. And this is one of the specific questions that came up during the PWAB meeting is if we identify a change and we determine that material change is not extra to the existing design build scope. So it's not existing scope that we're asking the contractor to do, but rather as part of their contract, it is something that they need to do. That becomes a design clarification and does not become a potential change order. So there was some discussion about what about the potential change orders that come in front of us that are really something the contractor should already be doing? Are they allowed to charge profit on top of that? And the answer is that council will never see anything that is a change to our scope of change to the project, but should already be included in the design build team scope of work. And I have some examples of those that I can share as we go through here. If we do determine that it's a material change in the design build scope, what we typically do, depending on the timing and the criticality of this, as we've gone through into construction, things are a little bit more time sensitive, and we will typically go right into development of a draft PCO. But during the design process, we would develop a raw order of magnitude costs. And this really becomes the first gate at which we can make a determination. Is this a change that we want to look at in any great detail, or because of the initial estimate of the cost, we want to go ahead and forego it and not make the change to the project? So once we have that raw order of magnitude cost in front of us, we work at the staff level to make a decision to move forward and have the design build team develop a draft PCO. They go through and develop that draft PCO. We review that draft PCO as the program manager. Again, this was another point of conversation with the Public Works Advisory Board about this process. And we have a lot of verbiage in this presentation and at other times about negotiation between the program management team and staff and the design build team. And there's really two things that we do as the program management team and staff when we go through and we vet and negotiate these PCOs. We do two levels of review. One is done by the construction manager, and the construction manager will go through and look at the individual components that are identified in the PCO, and he will do kind of the first check and say, okay, some of these items here are extraneous and are duplicative and should be included in other parts of the design build team's contract. And so he'll go through and kind of weed out items that shouldn't be included. The other thing that he does is he looks at it and based on his number of years of construction experience will go and say that he would anticipate this change order being on the order of magnitude of, say, $100,000. So he kind of does the first check to make sure does this pass does this make sense in terms of the scope, and does it pass this initial sanity test in terms of level or order of magnitude. But then we also have our construction cost estimators. These are folks that do construction cost estimating for our Carollo construction management, design build group, and they will go through and do a detailed estimate or a detailed review of the estimate and come back with comments. We discuss those comments both from kind of the sanity check as well as the detailed review, and then we do our final negotiation. We come up with the final PCO price with the design build team. And then we bring this to, previously we'd brought all PCOs to WRFCAC. Now they all go to PWAB. They review them and then they come to council for final review and approval. So this is a breakdown of the current agreement, design build agreement status. The original agreement amount was $67.2 million. We had a number of amendments that have been reviewed and approved by council. The latest was during the summer of this year, a sizable amendment of about $6 million. And the current guaranteed maximum price for the project is just shy of $75 million at this point in time. And we are carrying still a $1.5 million contingency in our existing budget for any additional change orders. So where we find ourselves this evening is contemplating amendment number 4. The total value of amendment number 4, all the PCOs that I'm going to go through, is $835,000. That would bring the guaranteed maximum price up to, That would bring the guaranteed maximum price up to $75.8 million and would leave about $615,000 in our existing budget for additional change orders moving forward on the project. This is a breakdown of the costs and where the costs are coming from. So this pie chart here represents a total of just over $835,000, and you can see that that $835,000 is dominated by we'll call it really 4 PCOs. That's PCO 82. PCO 71, PCO 78, and PCO 76. And there's a table in the body of the staff report that has the breakdown of the PCO values. There's also a table that was included in the staff report that was created as a direct response to a number of the questions that PWAB raised last week. That's included as attachment 1. It's an 11 by 17 table that has a little bit more information on the PCOs. And that you can reference that as we go through these individual PCOs. What we have done since we executed the design build agreement and we started contemplating changes was to categorize these different changes in terms of the primary rationale. So why would we bring a PCO in front of council. One of those reasons would be environmental constraints or the biological opinion. Again, you can see that that's a pretty big component of the $835,000 we're talking about here tonight. We have changing conditions, improved operations, and reliability, redundancy. Those are kind of the four categories that are represented by the 12 PCOs that we'll be discussing this evening. As I've done in the past and did for PWAB, we're going to walk through the individual PCOs, not in the numerical order in which they're shown in the table, but really this is by the category. So we're going to be a little bit out of order in terms of the numbers, but if you have any questions, again, please stop me at any time. So we'll start with the largest bucket, which is the environmental constraints. And this is a situation that everybody should be pretty well versed in. It's something that we've been discussing since early in 2020. But this is the site access restrictions that were imposed by the situation that we had early in construction with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So starting back in 2019, we reviewed the permitting requirements with three of the large land use agencies that we deal with. It's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to identify the need for any permits. The figure on the left here shows this was taken from a supplemental report to our environmental document, which is a determination of the jurisdictional areas based on our biologist's assessment of all of the components of the project. And we had identified a number of areas in our project that would be jurisdictional, the water of the state or water of the United States. And the erosional feature, which is in question, we did not identify as jurisdictional. And we worked closely with the Army Corps of Engineers back in 2019 and the Regional Water Quality Control Board to get their buy-off that we did not need a permit. Now, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, that was a little bit of a different situation. And after more than a year of going back and forth with them, we ended up filing a notification and they ended up requiring us to get a streambed alteration agreement. The end result is that the contractor wasn't able to access all of the site when we submitted the notice to proceed, or we issued the notice to proceed back on March 20th earlier this year. So this PCO is related to this delayed access to the erosional feature between March 20th and July 14th, which is when we ultimately got the final streambed alteration agreement from CDFW. We worked closely with the DB team during this time to do anything that we could to mitigate any impacts to the project cost or schedule. And through a lot of coordination, we ended up negotiating a PCO with a total value of $554,000. And this is essentially for extra work that needed to be done to double handle material and to also kind of reconfigure the order of the DB team's work. So there's inefficiency costs associated with that. We're going to talk about two different PCOs here. It's PCO 71 and PCO 85. PCO 71 really deals with the additional actual on-the-ground work that needed to be done to mitigate this particular issue. PCO 85 has to do with the actual delay claim that the design build team had. So when we first discussed this item with council, we estimated that it had a value of up to $1 million. And as you can see here, this first part of the PCO that we're going to discuss, the design build team brought us a draft PCO value of about $590,000, And after review and negotiation, we brought that down to $554,000. Well, we do have $1 million environmental allowance that we can use to cover some of these environmental issues that come up during design and construction. We opted to shift about $300,000 of that $554,000 into that environmental allowance bucket. And I can elaborate on that, what exactly that is if you have any questions. And we ended up with a total impact to the GMP of about $254,000. So PCO 85, as I mentioned, is the companion PCO to the previous one, and really deals with the scheduled delay claims that were made by the design build contractor. So in order to assess the validity or the impact of this PCO, we brought on a P6 scheduling expert to review the delay claim that was made by the design build team. And through that forensic investigation, we identified that the work that was done as part of PCO 71, double moving material, changing the order of construction, that actually eliminated any scheduled delays. So the overall result of that was we had estimated the total impact of this PCO or this group of PCOs to about $1 million. And in fact, the draft PCO value was $562,000 is what the DB team brought to us. We ultimately negotiated that down to $0. So the total impact of the CDFW delay was estimated or was at one point was almost $1.2 million. And through negotiation and use of our environmental allowance, the GMP impact is about $250,000. That is the environmental constraints PCO. So that those two PCOs together make up that component. Now we're going to move into the improved operations category. PCO 30 is related to matching some like equipment throughout different areas of the plant. So just to review real quickly how we go through the equipment procurement for this type of project. The design build contract identifies for major pieces of equipment or major suppliers of equipment a couple of named manufacturers that the design build team can go to and get pricing from, and they can select the lowest cost manufacturer in that list of manufacturers to provide equipment. In this particular instance, the design build team went through and selected the low cost manufacturer for a couple of different systems, but there's some like equipment between those different systems that are being supplied by different manufacturers. And so what we are proposing is in this PCO is for the design build team to not go with the lowest cost manufacturer, but to go with the second low manufacturer, Airzon in this case, to provide blowers at a slightly increased cost to what the low cost manufacturer was in order to keep like equipment across the different areas of the facility. When we first started the design process, we estimated that this PCO could have a value of about $75,000 across different systems. We've now procured the vast majority of the equipment for the project, and the value of this PCO is about $17,000. So we had estimated about $75,000, and the actual value is about $17,000. And after our review, we concurred with the value for that PCO. PCO 73 has to do with man gates in the perimeter fence. We had originally identified a PCO in 2019 to make some fairly significant changes to the perimeter fence layout for the facility. That PCO 49, had a value of about $103,000. And upon further review of that PCO, based on the value, we decided to not move forward with those changes to the perimeter fence. However, I guess you could say we threw the baby out with the bathwater on this one, and we actually had a couple of small improvements that were lumped into this group of more significant improvements that we wanted to move forward. So what we ended up doing is creating a new PCO and pulling out some of these components. And so what we initially had estimated as about $103,000 PCO, the draft PCO value ended up being about $27,000 for several additional man gates, some concrete walkways, and some other improvements to the fence around the facility. So the draft PCO value was brought to us at $27,000, and based on our review, we concurred with that number. Parking canopy electrical receptacles. This is PCO 74. We had identified the need, or staff had identified the need for electrical receptacles at the covered storage area that is at the head of the treatment plant, where the city will have its utility worker vehicles and such there. In order to charge batteries and be able to run equipment around to service those trucks, the city requested the addition of some outdoor rated outlets to the structure. This included additional wiring and conduit and everything to make this system operational. The draft PCO value that was brought to us was about $42,000, and after our review, we concurred with that number. PCO 79 is a modification to water collection system, water and collection system supply sheds. So the RFP originally identified 2 small sheds for storage of equipment for utilities near the head of the plant. Based on what was provided in the design build team's proposal, we identified PCO 50 that was approved by council back in the summer of this year. That was included as part of amendment number 3. And we ended up adding 2 roll-up doors to the building, and also combining the 2 smaller sheds into one building. Based on further design development and review, we've identified the need to increase the roll-up door size to 12 feet, and also to make some plumbing modifications in the building to make it more functional for O&M staff. The cost impact of this PCO is just shy of $11,000. That was the draft value that was brought to us for review, and we concurred with that value. SCADA Uniformity. This is PCO 82. This is very similar to the previous PCO that we discussed. That was PCO 30, that had to do with having like equipment, mechanical equipment in different areas of the facility. And this PCO itself, PCO 82, is achieving that same goal, but across the instrumentation and controls for the facility. So PCO 37 was approved by council as part of amendment number 3 earlier this summer. That covered a large chunk of the equipment that we had procured and had helped standardize the controls and instrumentation for a number of the large systems, including the membrane bioreactor, the reverse osmosis system, and the UV disinfection system. And we're bringing this PCO to kind of as the second half of that process to ensure that we have like equipment across the belt press that we're using for biosolids dewatering and the SAFE system. The value of this PCO was estimated at just shy of $109,000. We reviewed that PCO, reviewed the quotes from the individual manufacturers, and agree with that value of $109,000. Operator safety. This is another category of improvements, a relatively small category as it relates to this particular grouping of PCOs, but this has to do with adding a security window at the administration building that will be at the water reclamation facility. And as I'm sure all of you know, some changes were recently made to City Hall and the Public Works building to add some windows here for increased security. This is essentially adding that same level of security to the new administration building. Wasn't something that was previously identified when the RFP was developed, or the original agreement was developed. And so a draft PCO value of just over $11,000 was brought to us to review, and we concurred with the value of that PCO. Reliability and redundancy. PCO 76 has to do with the addition of of a single pump, as well as some heating blankets for our sodium bisulfite tanks that are located at our chem facility. And without getting into too much detail, sodium bisulfite is our last line of defense for quenching the chlorine residual that's created when we disinfect the wastewater before it goes out to the ocean outfall. For one reason or another, the RFP had identified only a single pump for this SPS system, and because of the critical role that it plays in the process, we identified the need for a second pump. This is really one that we, in every successive design iteration, was shown with a single pump, and it wasn't until about the 90% design that we started that someone brought up the fact that we've got redundant pumping for a lot of these different chem systems, but we don't for the sodium bisulfite system. And so, based on the review and discussion that we had as a group, we decided that was important for more reliability and redundancy as it relates to permit compliance. So the draft PCO value for this PCO was $58,000. We reviewed that PCO, and $58,000. We concurred with that value of $58,000. So changing conditions. The first one we have here is PCO 72. This is the owner trailer utility hookups. We talked about this one a little bit previously, but we have a program management trailer that is used by the program management team and construction management team on site that's separate from the contractors' trailers. And this PCO has to do with providing utility service to the PM trailer and installing a mailbox in front of the treatment plant. And I assure you that the majority of the cost is as you'll see from the detail that was provided in the staff report, is attributed to providing the utilities to the trailer and not just a simple mailbox. The cost summary for this is about $20,000. Again, we've reviewed it and concurred with the value. One thing that I did want to mention about this PCO is how this, the other way that we had looked at providing utility service to the PM trailer was to actually hire our own contractor, a separate contractor that would come on site and do these utility hookups. And after talking with the design build team, we determined that it would likely be more cost effective to have the design build team do this as a change order to their existing contract. And so the decision was made to move forward with that work. PCO 86, water shutoff valve in Teresa Road. Again, this was another item that could have been done by a third-party contractor. This is some potholing work that needed to be done in Teresa Road to identify the location of a city-owned valve for connection of our 18-inch water line from the facility. The city decided to utilize the services of the design build team contractor who was already on site to do this work, about a value of $5,000. And again, we concur with that value. This is another major PCO in a situation that we've been discussing at the treatment plant since early May, and this is PCO 78, which is the soil slip. On this slide, you can see the size of the soil slip that occurred on the cut slope. And this occurred as the design build contractor was grading the slope, grading it back. You can see a fissure that runs along the perimeter of the soil slip, about 6 feet deep and about 18 inches wide. And that you can see a couple of people standing at the top of the soil slip, which will give you some perspective in terms of the size of the area that did slide. So this landslide occurred was discovered on May 5th. As a result, an analysis was completed by Earth Systems Pacific, who's the geotechnical engineer for the design build team. Their analysis was done on the specific soil slip, and we also employed our own geotechnical engineer that is contracted with Carollo to come in and do a peer review of Earth Systems Pacific's findings. First System Pacific came to the conclusion that the slip was the result of an ancient landslide or a pre-existing condition that occurred. And because it was a pre-existing condition that was not known to the contractor, that they were not responsible for that. Ye and Associates, after reviewing their work, concurred with that finding, and that is why this has become a change order. I know we've discussed it a number of times. We had some early theories as to potentially why the landslide occurred, and as part of this review, Ye and Associates not only reviewed the analysis kind of after the slip occurred, but they also did a detailed analysis of the geotechnical report and the specific slide analysis that was done to substantiate the earthwork that was being done on the site. And they concurred as well that the 2-to-1 slope that was being used to cut back that slope area was appropriate, and they agreed with that 2-to-1 slope, cutting it back there. So the slide was not as a result of an error and omission of the design team, but rather a pre-existing condition. We had identified this as potentially having an impact of about $500,000. We were brought a draft PCO with a value of about $366,000, and after a lot of work by our construction manager and an elimination of a number of items that were not should not have been included in the estimate, that was reduced down and negotiated down to about $280,000. Before I go back over the recommendation, there is one item that was discussed in the staff report that I just wanted to mention briefly, and that is we do not anticipate bringing any major change orders in front of council. There are 2 current change orders that we're working with. Actually 3 change orders that we're currently dealing with. One has to do with impacts from COVID-19. That is a claim that we got a letter shortly after the issue of the notice to proceed from the design build contractor of their right to claim at a later date for impacts from COVID-19, whatever those might be. At this point in time, we have not identified a value for that PCO, and we're not sure that PCO will necessarily result in an impact of the GMP, but that is still an issue that's out there, and the contractor has their right to claim on that PCO. The other 2 issues that we're currently dealing with, one is some conduit changes, part of a previous PCO that we're looking at reversing a portion of that for different areas in the plant based on some further review. So that PCO could have a value of about $200,000 when all is said and done. The other PCO that we're dealing with is actually a credit that we are working on. Current value of that credit, we're estimating about $300,000, and that is to the wildlife exclusion fence that will be erected around the water reclamation facility site. And we are currently working, we've got a preliminary buy-off from EPA and from United States Fish and Wildlife, and we're just going through kind of the final review and approval before we bring that final PCO to council for their review. Again, our recommendation this evening is for the City Council to authorize the City Manager to execute Amendment Number 4 with the design build team for a total value not to exceed $835,097. And with that, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Eric, for the comprehensive presentation. Very much appreciated. Council, we'll go ahead and do both questions and any comments you may want to make at the same time. So either or during your conversation is certainly appropriate. I'll go ahead and start off, Eric. One of the questions I think I know the answer to, but I consistently get asked by community members is, I thought when we did this design build project and entered into an agreement, there was a guaranteed maximum price. How come the price goes up over time? Now, I know you're going to say, the change orders, but can you just reiterate what happens contractually and legally with regard to these issues? Are they common in projects that you're familiar with that are design build to see change orders like this of this magnitude, and why once we had that guaranteed maximum price of $67,234,000, is it now 75 and some change? So we'll start with that.
That's Mr. Mayor, that's a good question. So at the very core, there is a guaranteed maximum price, and that guaranteed maximum price is for a very defined scope of work that is detailed in the design build team's contract, and specifically Exhibit B of the design build team's contract. So when that contract was executed, it was for that specific scope, and over time, through the design process specifically, we have identified both ourselves and city staff. We have identified a number of items that were interpreted by the design build team as part of the proposal process and the procurement process that we didn't agree with their direction. And so in the cases where that has happened, that's where a majority of the PCOs have come from. The other source of the PCOs have come from some changing contractual conditions, particularly the delays that were caused first by the California red-legged frog, and then also by some of these issues with CDFW. So, if you wanted to kind of categorize all the change orders we've dealt with at this point in time, I'd say I think it's without having the numbers right in front of me, 40 odd percent or close to 50% costs that have come up.
Eric, you cut out there for a sec. Sorry, 40 to what? Go ahead.
I was saying about 50. I'd say about approximately 50% has to do with delay costs that have been caused by environmental issues or other things that we've had to deal with, and the other 50% cost of the change orders is essential owner-initiated items that have been invoked.
Okay, and in your experience, managing other projects or your company's experience, is it common, uncommon to see guaranteed maximum prices exceeded at the end of a project?
Yes, so there's a number of different ways to procure a project, and even when you talk about, alternative delivery, in this case, design build, with this type of fixed price design build, where you are locking in a cost very early in the process before you go through a lot of the design development, it is not uncommon to identify a significant quantity of change orders.
Okay, and just want to focus in on a couple of the PCOs to ask you questions. I think I know the answers to, but I think it's important for the public and the community to hear it. Item 71. That's the CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife site access issue. I happen to be pretty intimately aware of this interaction with CDFW, and I don't mean to throw stones or cast aspersions on CDFW, but I know that being part of the WRF subcommittee with Councilmember McPherson, almost on a weekly basis for months, we talked about the lack of response on the part of CDFW with regard to the stream bed alteration agreement. And I call this out because I'm thankful that you were able to negotiate down the impact, from the potential $1 million to $254,000. But I'll ask again, and I've asked it before, and again, I think I know the answer to this, but is there anything you could have done to expedite that process? And I will tell the public that unfortunately or fortunately, I had to get involved with our state legislators and the former director of California Natural Resources to get pressure on CDFW to respond with a stream bed alteration agreement so that you could get moving. But I know it's a long-winded question, but if you can just reiterate, because that's a big number. Obviously, you've negotiated down well. Just affirm the issues that you had to go through to get this thing taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, we went through a number of. It's a good question, and as I mentioned, we began this discussion and coordination process with them, prior to 2019, really with the environmental document. The environmental document was very clear that we did not believe that any area on the treatment plant was jurisdictional, and we gave all the agencies the opportunity to review our environmental document and comment on the findings and the recommendations in that document. And then subsequently, we coordinated with them to get some type of letter, essentially affirming our position. And after about a year of going around and trying to get that response, we finally entered into the formal notification process, which typically that ends up in a stream bed alteration agreement, which is what we, number one, never thought we needed. And as I sit here today, I will continue to say I needed that stream bed alteration agreement. And number two, we didn't think we needed it, and we didn't want it. And it carries with it its own environmental constraints and additional items and time issues. So that is I guess the process in
You cut out.
Oh, sorry.
Sometimes when you move your head just slightly, we lose contact with you. So anyway, I think I got it. Thank you for that explanation. On PCO 78, my question is, with regard to that pre-existing condition, was that not anticipated in the contract, or is that ever anticipated in these kinds of contracts? And, is there ever language included that basically points to issues that may be outside of norm, like something that's discovered after the fact? Could you have done anything contractually to put the onus on the design builder with the contract initially, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and so the structure of the contract is pretty standard in that way, and this is something that comes up a lot. Unforeseen underground conditions comes up a lot in the work that we do. A good example is groundwater depth. Geotechnical engineer might do work at a certain period of time during the year when groundwater levels are low, and does a geotech report. Contractor gets in, doesn't anticipate having any groundwater issues, but he's doing work outside of the time when the geotech report was done, and you've got groundwater to deal with. And that's a very typical claim that we see in construction. And again, it's an unforeseen or pre-existing condition or change of conditions. So, while we did a planning level geotechnical report to support the RFP process and bringing on the design build team, and while they did their own geotechnical analysis, their geotechnical analysis was sound, but you can't pothole and you can't put borings on every square inch of the site. The soil slip was relatively small compared to the site of the site, and we just didn't have the information through the on-site investigation to previously identify it.
Good. Thanks for that explanation. PCO number 82 is a pretty hefty price for what you're calling improved operations, and I'm all for improved operations. But my direct question is, what happens if there isn't standardization of these instruments and we didn't spend $108,000? What is the operational impact? Or is it just operationally impossible?
It's not operationally impossible. And I can, Joe Miller is here from the Interim Public Works Director who can probably best answer that question.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Joe Miller, the interim public works director.
Hey, Joe.
The best way to actually look at that control system is the difference between having one piece of equipment operating on an Apple software and another piece of equipment operating on an IBM PC. Definitely doable, but staff would have to learn two different types of operating system. And then the challenges that come into play with trying to communicate between the two. So initially you can get it to work. It's a lot more training for our staff. Our current staff really does not have any type of SCADA system that they work with on a daily basis. Our old plants are over 70 years old, so it's going to be leaps and bounds for these guys just to get up to speed, and then to actually throw that other wrinkle in there, it definitely would just make the facility harder to operate. So definitely is doable, but it's two different computer operating systems. I liken it to Apple and IBM.
Okay, great. That's a good explanation, Joe. I appreciate that. And Eric, my last question to you, and I know it's in the report, but I just want to call it out. If we approve the $835,000 and some change PCOs, will there be an impact on rates, inline consumer rates?
Yes, so no, there will not be an impact to rates. And there is not an impact to the budget, as our current budget, which is supported by the rates, includes about $1.5 million of contingency specifically identified for the water reclamation facility. And as I mentioned, we don't anticipate bringing back many more PCOs of any size, and likely future PCOs would be offsetting in terms of credits and costs.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. With that, I'll go to Councilmember Davis. Sir, questions or comments?
Thank you. Yes. Eric, as always, I appreciate your expert presentation. I have just one question. That's on PCO 71. The environmental allowance of $300,000. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Davis. So when the agreement was originally executed, the GMP was about $67.5 million. Within that $67.5 million, the DB team was informed that they needed to keep $1 million within that $67.5 million that could be used at the city's discretion to cover environmental items that may come up as we finalize the environmental document and as we move the project forward. We have utilized just about that whole $1 million through a number of different elements that have come up through the process. So what we've previously attributed to that $1 million was some changes to the stormwater system, to better manage stormwater and to direct it and keep it on site and direct it through the vast majority of that through the treatment process. We also used it to allow the contractor to bring on board some additional archaeological monitors for the project. That was something that was required by our environmental document. We also used a portion of that $1 million to pay for the temporary exclusion fence that's been erected around the site. So the orange fencing that goes all around the site that keeps the red-legged frogs out of the site. That was also part of it. And with the $300,000 that would offset our PCO from the CDFW delay, that would pretty much bring the total allowance that would be remaining to just under $100,000, I believe.
Okay, so the way I understand what you said then is that the environmental allowance is in essence an additional contingency fund that we were allowed to draw upon.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And I can't remember the wording from the RFP exactly, but it was, we know that we're going to have additional environmental things that we're going to have to deal with. We just don't know exactly what those are now because the RFP was let out before the final environmental document was certified by council. So.
Right. Okay. I remember that now. Okay. Thank you. And I'll go into comment simply to say that I very much appreciate the negotiations that you and Mr. Mimiaga and your team have engaged in to reduce the cost of many of these change orders. As Councilmember Heller told us at the very outset, one of the main jobs of the owner's agent is to represent the owner's interest in dealing with the contractor. And I feel as if you have done that to a very high degree, and I appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Appreciate that. Councilmember Heller, comments, questions, sir?
I'm here. Let's see if I can get my video working.
There you go.
This is the parking lot at the Rock. Right after, this was in March, right after COVID-19 hit. Wow. And we said everybody has to stay home and nobody can come here. This is the only time I remember this parking lot ever being empty.
That's amazing.
Beautiful day. I went out there and there was not one car except for mine in the parking lot. So
let's keep that as a memento.
That's my background for the day here. Questions? Okay, so I'm wondering why all these PCOs weren't in our meeting last week when we talked about other WRF-related issues. Is there some reason we didn't do it then?
No, Councilmember Heller, that's a good question. Really, it just came down to the amount of items in the agenda and working with the city manager and city clerk. That's really what it came down to. We had more pressing WRF items that were time sensitive.
Okay.
Last week.
And you probably thought I'd ask a lot of questions, right?
Well, I did see you at the PWAB presentation. I did see you that you were online for that. So
yeah, I want to thank PWAB again for all the folks on that committee have really spent time going through this technical information and asking really good questions. And you don't hear about them, they're in the background, but they do a great job. And I want to thank them all for the time that they've put in on this project and other issues brought before them. And many of them are at the end of their term, and they've done a great job. So this is my question. We're pretty far along with the WRF, meaning the plant itself. And what we're talking about in terms of change orders applies to the plant only. You've reduced, if we're assuming the council approves this amendment, we've reduced our contingency for the sewer plant itself to less than 1%, $614,000. Are you completely convinced this is enough money to cover the balance of the project, this particular piece of the project?
Yes, I am at this point, based on the PCOs that we've identified and where we are in construction. So just a quick update on kind of where we are and where we would typically identify some of these PCOs. And it goes back to where a lot of these PCOs have come from. Part of it is design. So we anticipated a good amount of change orders coming out of the design process, as we would in a typical design build process, particularly one that's scheduled or that's structured in this way. We are essentially out of the ground at the water reclamation facility site. So we're pretty much done with underground utilities and all the earthwork and everything else that we can typically run into issues that would not be within the purview of the design build team for them to deal with. And then the other item is equipment procurement. That can always be a challenge. And we've had some PCOs that deal with, things work out sometimes and we get, just by chance, we get light pieces of equipment. Other times those can turn into to change orders to try to get light pieces of equipment throughout the facility. We're virtually done with our equipment procurement for this project for major pieces of equipment where we would anticipate any change orders. So I'm confident that we would move forward without the need for additional budget revisions for this portion of the project.
Okay, so it looks like we're going to be able to finish the plant for $75.8 million plus or minus a little bit, sounds like. Okay. I'm not going to go through with a lot of questions about the PCOs. I do want to respond to Mayor Heading's question about guaranteed maximum price. And, you know, this kind of has been a bone of contention for me for 3 years. My experience is different than yours, Eric. You know, over the past 30 years, I've worked on major publicly funded projects in Southern California primarily, but also at Cal Poly. And you can look at my website, Jeff Heller and Associates, and see the quality of the projects. And in my experience, guaranteed maximum price does in fact mean guaranteed maximum price, plus or minus 1, 2, maybe 3%. But the delivery method itself is designed to be exactly what it says. And, you know, when you look at Cayucas, I'm not sure if they did design build, but they're almost done with their plant. Their change order range is like in the 2% range. That's where a change order should be, regardless of the delivery method. But guaranteed maximum price sets a higher standard. And where we've fallen short here, I think we just need to acknowledge, you know, it hasn't really worked well for the city of Morro Bay. And the disappointing thing is that you have professionals in the community that have been trying to bring this to the city's attention for a number of years, who've largely been ignored. The Citizens Advisory Committee is disbanded. And here we are with a project that right now, which is only going to get more expensive probably, but this WRF project, guaranteed maximum price, is 13% above the estimating the price that we were told it would not exceed ever a year and a half, 2 years ago. And the city sold it to all the residents. And we've had 2 Prop 218 rate increases, and we're 13% above the guaranteed maximum price. In my experience, this is not normal. You ask the folks at Cal Poly, this is not normal. Now, public agencies like City of Morro Bay, hey, most of them don't know any better. So they hire firms to manage the project, and sometimes they go sideways. I think as a council, as a city, we need to admit this one has gone sideways, and we need to find a better way to manage our capital dollars, because a lot of money has been lost on this project and will be lost. So that's my perspective about all these changes. I could take issue with every one, but most of it comes down to the documentation. And by that, I mean the original facilities master plan created by Black and Veatch, the understanding by the public agency that allowing the firm that created that facilities master plan to actually bid and become the design build contractor is illegal in the state of California. And I think the county district attorney office would agree with me. And understanding it's a very complex issue, a very complex process. As you know, any construction project with hundreds of millions of dollars involved is complex. You really have to know what you're doing. And, you know, we're over our heads in this, frankly. But I think we can do better if we can talk to each other and allow the voices who have the experience to come forward and be listened to. Unfortunately, this process has created a lot of dissension in the community, which still exists. I want to publicly state I am no longer trying to stop this project. At this point in my career as a politician and a member of this community, I just want to try and save as much of this money that we haven't spent yet to bring this project to completion. But I'm not opposed. I'm not trying to stop the project, which I think many people in the community think I am. The unfortunate thing is most and many of residents in the Morro Bay community have lost confidence in this council's ability to manage their money, their capital dollars, their rate increases. And the other thing that I think is very easy to forget in the context of this sewer project is this $139 million is just for a sewer plant. It doesn't take care of the collection systems, all the sewer and water lines that need to be replaced. It doesn't take care of demolishing the existing plant. It doesn't take care of a new corporate yard. Where's the money going to come from? I think this council needs to step up and start talking about these issues. How are we going to fund all this other infrastructure, the needs that we have? In my opinion, we've kind of spent all of our money to build this palace on the hill and ignored the rest of our infrastructural needs with respect to sewer and water. So the buck stops here. It stops with the council, and it stops with our recognition that maybe we're over our head and we need to look at a way of doing things better in the future. That's all I have. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller, and thank you for the opinion on your experience. I do appreciate that. I respect your career and what you've done, and it's good insight to have that. I concur with you in a number of different areas. I won't go into detail, but appreciate your comments. Councilmember McPherson, please. Questions, comments?
Yes, thank you. Since I have been a member of the WRF subcommittee, I am familiar with most of these issues, and I do not have any questions beyond what has already been asked. Many of the ones that I did have been asked already and answered. And I know that it's been a difficult project from the beginning, but I do have to disagree with my colleague, Mr. Heller, about a number of issues. I think it's really unfair to blame Mr. Caceres for many of the things that have happened in this project. I would absolutely admit that mistakes have been made. And I know when I got on the council, one of the first things we had to do was resolve some of those mistakes that had been made, which was having people with insufficient experience preparing some of those initial documents. But I do have to give Eric credit for picking up and doing a really good job of resolving the issues that have come up, unintended issues, and for helping us get the low interest loan that has allowed us to, in fact, deal with some of these problems without it impacting rates because of the low interest loan. And I believe we'll eventually be able to reduce our water and sewer rates once we get the SRF loan finalized. I also want to disagree that the council has not listened to people in the community. We have absolutely had great input from the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, from the WRF CAC, and from PWAB that have made very constructive comments along the way. So I want to thank those groups for all of their comments and their assistance. Yes, it is a difficult project. It has been difficult, and we've had issues, and they are being resolved, and we are moving forward, and those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember McPherson. And I'll add one comment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Caceres, but with regard to Councilmember Heller's statement regarding fixing our pipes, our rate increase, our last 218, includes our One Water plan and about $40 million of infrastructure improvements over the next 40 years. Is that 35 years? Is that correct?
Yes, so Mr. Mayor, that's a good point. So the $139 million project budget doesn't include those projects, but the rate increase in the last 218 process supports both the WRF project as well as additional One Water projects. And a number of those, I think 5 or 6 of them are currently in progress right now.
Thank you. Just want to make that clarification. Councilmember Addis, comments and or questions?
All my questions were answered. I'm super excited that we have a unanimous council that's no longer trying to stop the WRF. I think that's wonderful. So thank you, Councilmember Heller, for joining with us on that. And nobody likes change orders, and nobody likes an expensive project. But the silver lining here, there's a few silver linings I see. One is that rates are not going up, so we get to continue at the rates we have, and we get to continue looking at how we might lower those rates in the future. But also we're securing Morro Bay's water future. And that's a critical piece here. I think we need to keep our eye on the prize and keep moving into the future and keep looking forward. And so I was most worried about a change order that is not being that discussed that in depth right now, which is that frog fencing, which seemed incredibly expensive to me. And I'm glad to see that when that comes back to us, the cost on that one is going to be coming down a bit. But so, I'm ready to move forward with this, basically.
Great, thank you. And so with that, I will go ahead and move that we authorize the city manager to execute amendment number 4 with Phelon, Block, and Veach, the design build team, for a total value not to exceed $835,097.
I second that.
Motion by Mayor Heading for the staff recommendation, seconded by Council Member McPherson. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Heading,
Yes.
Councilmember McPherson,
Yes.
Councilmember Addis,
Yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
and Councilmember Heller.
No.
Motion carries 4-1.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to item number 5, which we agreed in the beginning to move up to item number 2. This is review and provide input regarding proposed sewer use ordinance revisions to Morro Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 13.12. And turn it over to Mr. Casares or Mr. Levick. I'm not sure who.
Mr. Mayor, I can introduce the item. Thank you again for having us here and letting us put these 2 items back to back. Today we're going to go over a workshop with some changes to the sewer use ordinance. These changes were previously discussed with Public Works Advisory Board back in August of this year. And with me this afternoon, I have Penny Carlo, formerly of Carollo Engineers, but now with Penny Carlo Engineering. She is one of our sub-consultants who is going to be presenting the contents of the sewer use ordinance changes. So this is a workshop, and we plan to bring back this item in talking with the city clerk and city staff. Just a slight change. Planning to bring this item back in January and February, not in December and January. So the first reading, we're now planning in January, with the second reading in February. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and have Penny walk us through the presentation here.
Welcome, Penny.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm on my phone, so I wanted to make sure.
Hold on really quickly, Penny. I'm trying to get the share screen going, the correct one. I keep trying to share the whole presentation. There we go. Okay, so can everybody hear Penny and see the presentation?
Everything's good.
Okay, great. So Penny, just let me know when you want me to advance.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, for the time for us to present this update on the sewer use ordinance. And so, we've got a number of slides here. We're eager to hear your feedback as we go through the presentation. Eric, do you want to go to the first slide? Okay, thank you. This first slide for our topic today is just a recap, an overview of the water reclamation facility that we have been talking about for the last hour, and use this as kind of our launching point for talking about the new program for the pretreatment program. The city's investing in the new water reclamation facility. This schematic shows the WRF, the conveyance facilities for pipelines, pump stations, injection wells, the pipeline to the outfall for brine, the advanced wastewater or the advanced water treatment facilities for the plan to be able to inject up to 825 acre-feet per year of finished water to augment the water supply. And, we're using this as a launching pad for talking about the ordinance. The pretreatment program that the city is initiating is designed to protect the new water supply and to protect your investment in the new water supply and all of the new infrastructure that's being built, in addition to protecting the existing infrastructure that you still have and will be continuing to use. So again, this is a effort to protect the water supply and your investment in your infrastructure. Okay, Eric, next. On this slide, mentioning that the WRF is designed to augment the local water supply, and as mentioned a bit ago, in securing your water future. This slide shows not just, in the last slide we talked about protecting your infrastructure and your facilities. We also need to protect the water quality. On this schematic we show on the left, starting with your municipality made up of businesses, residences, and a couple of industries, your conveyance system, collection system to transport wastewater to your treatment facilities, the advanced treatment to produce the purified water to inject into your aquifer. In order to protect the quality of the drinking water that you will be producing, we also need to protect the quality of the wastewater that is entering your collection system. So this program speaks to that as well. Next slide, Eric. And we want to mention here that in implementing a potable reuse program, the state of California has requirements for source control for agencies that are implementing potable reuse. Title 22 of California Code of Regulations stipulates that if you're going to be implementing potable reuse, you must administer an industrial pretreatment program and a source control program. Together, those are called an enhanced source control program. Title 22 also states that the produced effluent and the recycled water going to potable reuse must be in compliance with all permit limits at all times. And it identifies four main activities that a potable reuse agency must implement. First is to be able to assess the fate of contaminants through your reuse system. That's your wastewater treatment plant, your water purification plant, and the fate of contaminants are ones that directly are of a concern by the Division of Drinking Water and the Regional Water Board. You must be able to, and you should implement source investigations and monitoring and focusing on the constituents of concern by the Water Board and DDW. You must conduct an outreach program to industries, residential dischargers, commercial dischargers, with an effort to work toward minimizing the discharge of pollutants into your system to protect your drinking water. And you should maintain or must maintain a contaminant inventory, and that's data on pollutants that are in your wastewater and your water currently, and then keep tabs on future needs and any anticipations looking ahead to maintain that contaminant inventory going forward. Okay, next, Eric. Okay. This is an animated slide, Eric. So if you want to click on what we're showing on this one is the different aspects of your pretreatment program that will be used to protect the water supply. excuse me. First, we'll be protecting the circle, the staff and public in the city that are in or near the sewers and the treatment facilities. We need to protect the collection system. This is against obstructions that might be occurring from oil and grease discharged from restaurants, causing obstructions, any types of chemicals, acidic discharges that might cause corrosion of your sewer system. So we need to protect that. In the next click, Eric, we show that we need to protect the treatment plant processes all the way across the board. This will be the biological treatment plant and the advanced purification facility and your injection well. So all of these plant processes need to be protected from interference or passing through of pollutants to your ultimate use of the water, which is effluent discharge to the ocean, biosolids. Eric, in the next click, need to be protected. And then ultimately, with the last click, Eric, that would be the protecting the reuse and the quality of your drinking water. So we're looking at this with the City of Morro Bay to the traditional National Pretreatment Program objectives for wastewater facilities and collection systems, and also the new program for advanced treatment and producing a water supply. So this program addresses all of these elements to protect your system. The next slide shows the elements of a pretreatment and source control program that we've been developing for the city. And these are based on the basic elements as defined by EPA and the National Pretreatment Program. The first is to have a regulatory mechanism and legal authority to carry out your program, and that's what we'll be talking about today with your sewer use ordinance. You must have procedures for carrying out your program, such as monitoring industries, issuing permits to industries, how to do inspections, what's allowed, what's not allowed, that sort of thing. Funding of your program and your staff so that you can maintain the program. Establishing local limits, which are discharge limits on industrial users. An enforcement response plan, which gives you a roadmap or a guidebook on how to uniformly enforce the sewer use ordinance if there should ever be a problem with an industry or with a discharge causing an impact on your facilities or your drinking water. You're required to identify other industries in your area. We did this by doing an industrial waste survey. It will need to be updated annually, identifying who to permit, if you have any new businesses coming to town, and procedures for working with them to determine if they need a discharge permit or not. Through that work, we identified 2 significant industries in the service area that will be permitted through this effort. And then also monitoring and reporting requirements for industries, and also some activities for the city as they perform their efforts to monitor compliance. Next slide, Eric. The current municipal code does not provide the city with adequate legal authority to protect the facilities that I've been talking about. So we have gone through and done an update to the sewer use ordinance, which you have been provided. Another click, Eric, for text box to come up. So this updated sewer use ordinance, chapter 13.12, gives the city the legal authority to carry out all of the activities of the sewer use ordinance and to ensure compliance with your discharges. Next slide. So what I'm going to be doing now is walking through some of the main changes to the ordinance. First, just on this slide, just for an overall big picture, the changes first establish the purpose, policy, and objectives of the sewer use ordinance. We've added in authority for the city to issue discharge permits to industries or commercial businesses. It provides language on monitoring, reporting, and compliance requirements for industrial users, establishes the city's enforcement policies, and establishes discharge limits for industrial users. So this is all new. We've also incorporated the city's existing program for the fats, oils, and grease program so that is brought into the sewer use ordinance for consistency in carrying out the requirements and for that, and also for city staff to ensure that restaurants are abiding by the FOG program correctly. Next slide, Eric. So now I'm going to go into the main articles of the ordinance and just talk a bit about the purpose of each one. And I mentioned up on Article 1, it says that's titled General Provisions. I want to mention in parentheses, we have US EPA model sewer use ordinance. I forgot to mention that we used EPA's model as our guide to develop the sewer use ordinance for Morro Bay. It was developed back in the mid-'80s during the development of the National Pretreatment Program. It has stood the test of time, and it is the template that POTWs use all over the nation for developing their ordinance. So during the development of this sewer use ordinance, we started with that, merging in the current ordinance into this new template, and then working closely with Mr. Mueller and Mr. Pannoni and staff to complete the revisions and to build this so that it's customized for Morro Bay. In Article 1, General Provisions, again, we've established the purpose and the policy and the objectives. We've also established who has the legal authority to administer the ordinance, and we have assigned this to the utilities manager or his or her designee to carry out all of the provisions and enforce the sewer use ordinance. We've also added in a lot more definitions to the list of definitions that were already in the ordinance, and they are in large part common terminology needed for proper understanding of the ordinance and also proper interpretation of the policies, which will help avoid legal challenges down the road when terms are properly defined. In Article 2, we've got the general sewer use requirements, and we started with the backbone that was in the city's current ordinance and expanded it. The first aspect is prohibited discharge standards. There are a lot of statements and paragraphs on what is not allowed to be discharged into the sewer, such as hazardous waste, noxious waste, medical waste, hauled waste, dental amalgam. So there are a lot of prohibited discharge standards. We also established requirements for meeting pre-treatment standards and best practices if developed, and if the city requires businesses or industries to utilize some BMPs, that is established here in the sewer use ordinance, so that is clear. The city has the authority to require businesses or industries to establish them if needed. We've also established some narrative and numeric limits for specific contaminants. And we've also, there's a standard provision in there that the city may revise the ordinance from time to time or if needed for any reason. So there is always that opportunity to reopen it if needed. Next slide. I mentioned in the prior slide that we added some narrative limits or numeric limits, and these are limits that at this point we've been able to identify that are needed to help protect the treatment plant. Some were already in the ordinance. The parameters on the left in the first column were already included in your sewer use ordinance with limits for temperature and pH, et cetera. Fats, oil, and grease. So those are already in your ordinance, and we kept those the same. We've also, we're adding in new parameters. The ones in the middle column deal with toxicity, such as copper and mercury and ammonia. Ammonia is important for the proper operation of the plant. We want to make sure that the ammonia and nitrogen loading is not exceeded. Dioxane and NDMA are two that are of importance for your finished drinking water. So we've added in numeric limits for those, or we are in the process of finishing those at this moment. On the right, we are establishing some limits for parameters that are, we put in the bucket that are salinity-related constituents. And so those will be added. So again, the columns in the two right columns are constituents that we are finishing up what those limits are right now, and we'll insert those into the ordinance when it's ready for the first council hearing. And another thing I want to mention is once the new facilities are up and online and there's time to generate more data, it is possible that additional limits could be imposed if it is deemed necessary. But at this point, it's too premature to identify what those might be. And I do also want to mention before we move on that these discharge limits will be imposed on industries, and any current or future industries coming to town who are interested in coming to town will need to be able to meet these limits as a condition of their discharge. Okay, next one, Eric. Article 3 provides more direction on the pre-treatment of wastewater, and much of this was already contained in the current ordinance. We expanded on it and made some modifications for consistency, but this is pretty standard for a sewer use ordinance to have these requirements in there. So again, they were already in the current ordinance, and we did make some changes for consistency or for some improvement, but it establishes a policy on when an industry may need to install on-site pre-treatment equipment to pre-treat their industrial discharge before it goes to the sewer. And so the city has the legal authority, if reviewing an industry's discharge and information, to require an industry to install pretreatment. It requires that industries maintain their own facilities, and that would be if it's something like a flow metering equipment, gas detection meters, et cetera, that the industries are required to maintain their equipment in good working condition. May require industries in the fourth bullet to install a sampling manhole or for restaurants or other industries to install grease, oil, and sand interceptors. And again, this was in the current ordinance. And we've also added in the last bullet, the need to submit a plan for controlling any sludge discharges. If the city feels that that's something an industry needs to do, the city could impose that requirement on an industry. And again, controlling sludge discharges is important to prevent, a big flush of some type of pollutant into the sewer that could interfere or, cause problems at the treatment facilities. Okay, next, Eric. Article 4, this is standard language that came from the model ordinance. This is on industrial discharge permits. This section establishes the mechanisms by which the city will permit an industrial or commercial user that's discharging to the sewer. All of these requirements follow EPA guidelines, and we customize these for Morro Bay's specific needs so that they are working in the best interest of Morro Bay's program. Permits are considered control mechanisms that the city will use to directly regulate industries, and which the industries must abide by. And so we've established 3 permit categories. Class G are general users with the potential to discharge non-domestic waste. Class S are significant industrial users, typically ones that have a large flow, such as 25,000 gallons per day, or they have the potential to discharge pollutants of concern. And then food facilities. Those are Class F. So it does require an industrial discharge permit as a condition to discharge. This section, Article 4, provides guidelines and timelines for issuing permits, when they become effective. It lays out the contents of an application. It lays out the contents of a permit. And all that information for benefiting both the industry on full understanding of what comes with applying for and getting a permit, and provides the city with these guidelines and requirements on how to consistently issue permits from one industry to another, and then from one type of business to another. And this also protects, having this language protects the city, gives the city guidelines for when new businesses are coming to town and approaching the city, that they're interested in setting up their business in Morro Bay. So they provides a uniformity of requirements for current and future industries. Next one. This is Article 5. It's on the requirements for a discharge permit issuance. So we've got comments in here or language in here on that there'll be a maximum of 5-year duration. Oh, the contents of the permit are in this section. There's a permit issuing procedure, appeals process. It allows for modifications to a permit for good cause. It provides the allowance to transfer a permit if you sell your business to a new owner. Provides language for the city's authority to revoke a permit if an industry fails to meet requirements, and establishes reissuance procedure. So this section has all of those details for issuance of permits. Next slide, Eric. This Article 6 is called Reporting Requirements. It focuses on the requirements and obligations of industries to report to the city the quality of their discharge, volume of their discharge, their requirements for record keeping, reporting if there's possible violations. There's specific language in here for baseline monitoring reports. The second bullet talks about periodic compliance reporting. The city would specify this in the body of the industry's permit. It requires an industry to report to the city if something changed in their plant, if there's a potential problem. If their process went down and they know that they're going to have a slug coming into the plant that they haven't been able to control, they need to keep the city notified, and they are obligated to report if there's problems. If the industry knows they had a violation of parameter of pollutant concentration or something, they are required to notify the city. It establishes analytical requirements for sampling and testing, and it sets the record keeping. So this section 6, Article 6, is again established for requirements of the industry. Next slide, Eric. Article 7 is the fats, oils, and grease program. As I mentioned before, the city already had this policy established in their sewer system management plan, and we brought it into the sewer use ordinance so that it's all together, since the FOG program is intended for collecting or protecting the collection system from unnecessary and or problematic discharges of grease. So with having this within the sewer use ordinance, then the city can effectively permit the restaurants and monitor and regulate them with these requirements. So permits will be required for all food facilities. The city is already actively inspecting them. So this formalizes the program in this ordinance. Next slide, Eric. 3 other sections are mentioned here that we added to the ordinance. Article 8 is on compliance monitoring. It provides the city the right of entry to inspect and sample at any industry or any discharger. Article 9 is the confidentiality statement. It states that all data is available for the public access unless specifically requested by a user for trade secrets. So industries need to know if they've got proprietary equipment or trade secrets. They can work that out with the city, and that will be maintained as confidential. But data, reporting, the copies of the permits, things like that's all will be public information. And this is all standard with the EPA pretreatment program. And Article 10 is the enforcement section, remedies for noncompliance. It provides the city the authority to issue notices of violation, of consent orders, show cause hearings, cease and desist orders. It gives the city the authority to issue fines and to terminate a discharge. So all of these remedies are established in the ordinance. And then we have the enforcement response plan that pairs with this on giving the city guidelines for uniformly carrying out enforcement remedies. Next one, Eric. This is Article 11, the construction requirements, permits, and fees. This is the bulk of the original or the current sewer use ordinance. We moved it to the back of the ordinance with all the new ordinance in front. There is a lot of information here that is very standard for construction of sewers and connecting to the sewers, and we left the majority of this intact. We did remove some things because they were redundant with the new language. We moved some of this up into the new pretreatment sections. This still keeps the majority of that intact, but we did make some of those changes for consistency and redundancy purposes. I think that's the last one, Eric. Oh, we have one last slide. The next steps, as Eric talked about the council dates coming up for the the public hearing for the ordinance. Once the ordinance is adopted, the provisions will be immediately effective. The city will roll out implementation gradually. We worked with Mr. Mueller and his staff at what we felt was a reasonable rollout. We've identified 2 significant industries, and the plan will be to permit them within the first year. And then the other businesses that will be getting permitted will be permitted gradually over 3 years. We have 178 restaurants, and we've identified 33 commercial businesses. So those will be rolled out gradually at a cycle throughout the year so that it's manageable by city staff in terms of issuance and all of that administrative work that goes with that. Implementation will also involve outreach to industries, businesses, and residents. It's important to have good positive outreach with all of them for businesses and industries to inform them of the new program and answer any questions they have and hear their feedback. So that's the culmination of the presentation. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Penny. Appreciate the comprehensive overview of that. Council, this is a receive and file, but if you have any input and or questions, now would be the time for that. Let me just start perhaps by asking Mr. Casares, in the staff report, the fiscal impact, it looks like for year 1 is $245,000 and then ongoing of about $161,000, which I understand will be offset by inspection fees that will be paid for by the permitted businesses. And I don't recall, but I assume that we've already adopted that in our master fee schedule. Is that correct? Those permit fees?
This is Joe Miller, Interim Public Works Director. We did in the last adoption of the master fee schedule, we did account for fees for inspection and reinspection fees. So we did account for city staff time on that, but those fees don't account for any outside staff or any additional help that we may need from an outside source such as Carollo to help administer the program. But we do have fees in there for city staff time to monitor the industries.
Okay, and again, maybe it's for you, Joe, or anybody. Will we have any impact on rates to the ratepayers, or either sewer or water fees based upon these operational costs?
We don't anticipate any additional fees as far as for the users. What ancillary might come out of some of this, we might find that some businesses are potentially in the wrong classification. And we've been doing, the finance department has already started an audit of those businesses and started categorizing what class of strength the wastewater should be in. And if we find an error on either side, we're correcting that and have been actually going back and potentially issuing some rebates to businesses that were in higher classes than they should have been.
I guess my question is, you don't anticipate any rate increase necessary to our ratepayers based upon the requirement for another 218 for this ongoing annual fee?
We do not.
Okay, good. That was my question. Sorry, I should have been more clear. My last question is with regard to impact on businesses. I just maybe want to get an early sense. Are we talking about, for certain industries, a major increase in permitted costs and the cost of doing business to comply with this ordinance, or do we know yet?
We have been in communication with the two significant industrial users for the last couple of years already. They have approached us really at the forefront. Now, they both will have to have a capital investment on their side. And fortunately, both of these industries are franchise type businesses that have other facilities in other communities. So these are costs that they are familiar with, and that the franchise will be able to help them with, directing them in the correct procedures to actually get the equipment in. But some of the costs will be significant to them to bring their facilities in compliance.
Good. My only input would be thank you for the comprehensive review. I certainly support moving forward and looking forward to seeing the ordinance. Would be that, as you've mentioned, that there is significant input given to and by the businesses that are going to be impacted significantly by this financial hit. I just don't want personally to see any surprises. So good. Thank you. Councilmember McPherson, questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. I did submit questions ahead of time and received answers, but I just wanted to clarify where this came from in terms of our suddenly having to do this, because I know that we're small and we don't have significant industrial users, and it's only required for plants that have 5 million gallons a day or more and large industries. So is this because we are doing potable reuse?
Councilmember McPherson, that's correct. It is, the city is not required to have a formal pretreatment program because of the size and because of the makeup of the dischargers. But because we're doing potable reuse, we have to do something more than what the city is currently doing. And so that is why the number one, the enhanced source control program that is tied to the sewer use ordinance and the sewer use ordinance modifications are required.
Okay, and so the two industrial users, they would need to have permits because they do discharge more than 25,000 gallons. Is that correct?
One of them does. The other does not. But a significant industrial user can be one of three things: discharging more than 25,000 gallons per day, discharging more than 5% of the hydraulic organic load to the plant, or for any other reason that the POTW may deem necessary to protect the plant. So oftentimes, significant industries are not 25,000 gallons per day. They can be much lower than that. But they may have high-strength wastewater. They may discharge a pollutant at very high concentrations. So the low flow, does not give them any reprieve from that. So an SIU, the ultimate decision on what is an SIU is made by the POTW. On another category is if they're a categorical industry, if they're federally regulated, they would be an SIU.
Okay, and I understand you've been in contact with the two major folks that this will impact. Are there changes in the ordinance that are different from the current ordinance with respect to the fog requirements for restaurants and any other requirements for the 33 businesses that would require a permit?
Would you like me to take the? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I would say that the major difference is they'll actually be issued a permit now, the restaurants, and they will be governed under the sewer use ordinance. Before it was basically in our sewer system master plan, and it was more of a guideline that we were using. Now we will actually have a formalized program. What the restaurants, which is the majority of the other users, really see is that they'll have to, fill out the paperwork with their business license, tell us what they're doing, what their anticipated flows are. And, we'll have a more formalized program. But as far as what they are required to do, that their level of effort should not change.
I'd like to mention that the
cut out
businesses.
there.
Go ahead, Penny.
Oh, I'd like to mention that the other businesses will get general permits. They won't be required to install sampling manholes or to be flow metering, things like that. They will be getting permits that we call general permits. They're more generic, but they will require some best management practices and specific items that they need to do and explain the prohibitions on what they can't do. But by and large, they're often called BMP permits to explain what they need to do for good housekeeping or maintenance. For example, if they're a car wash and they have a oily water separator or something, or if they're an automotive repair and they've got certain discharges, those would be explained on how they do their good housekeeping or what they have to haul off site that they can't put down the drain, that type of thing. They would not be doing sampling per se. It's more management and prohibition.
Thank you. And my last question, what is the plan for outreach to all of these other businesses, since this will be a new requirement for them? I mean, will you be notifying them in advance about the meetings, about the proposed ordinance, inviting them to ask questions? Just what's your plan for outreach to the other businesses?
Go ahead, Penny.
No, I was going to say the formal aspect of that is when the ordinance is posted for the public hearing. But we do want to talk with some of them. I'm not sure if we've established the outreach to contact them ahead of that. Before the ordinance is posted or not. I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Caceres or Mr. Mueller can speak to that in terms of that plan for outreach.
Yeah, as we were talking here, I was just pulling up the enhanced source control program that was included in the staff report. Has some specific items outlining the outreach program. Let me see here. I'm just gonna look it up. Let's see here. If Councilmember McPherson, do you have any other questions? We can come back to that one. I don't want to speak out of school. I want to make sure that I pull this up before I answer your question.
So this was included in the attachments that were not part of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, there should be there's a section. It's Appendix E of the Enhanced Source Control Program that talks about the proposed public outreach activities, and they include things like modifications to the city's website, development of different brochures, and some other items that are specifically addressed.
So you might also consider assistance from the chamber.
Yeah, and actually, another one of my colleagues, Lydia Holmes, who is not on the call here today. The one question that I don't have the answer to off the top of my head is the amount of coordination or what coordination we've done with the chamber on this to date.
Okay. well, that would be my only suggestion, that you make sure and do that, and these businesses are notified ahead, because I know that they don't just monitor the city's website to see what issues are coming before us. So hopefully they're very well prepared in advance to come and provide public comments at the hearing. So thank you very much, and thank you for all the work on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the outreach plan specifically identifies the chamber, the tourism board, and the Merchants Association as the primary targets for outreach moving forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
May I?
Yes.
May I make another comment back in response to Councilmember McPherson? Earlier, you had asked about and I forgot to mention this, you had asked about when you're required to have a pretreatment program according to the national pretreatment regulations, a plant of 5 MGD. I just wanted to mention, I forgot to say this, that back in development of the enhanced source control program, we did look at that because the city's facility is so much smaller than that. We are not recommending a formal pretreatment program for the city of Morro Bay, in which they would submit it to the Regional Water Quality Control Board and get what's called formal approval, and that it would then be a formal program. This is going to be a robust pretreatment program that meets the intent of the National Pretreatment Program, follows all the guidelines and requirements of the National Pretreatment Program, but it is, because it will not be formalized by a formal submission by the city, the regional board can comment on it. DDW, Division of Drinking Water, will comment on it, but it will be an informal program. So it is a little bit less robust than a formal pretreatment program as stipulated in the 403 regulations.
Thank you.
So that is one difference between a plant, because City of Morro Bay's plant is much smaller than 5 MGD.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Heller, questions or comments?
Hold on here. Okay, so this is required by Department of Drinking Water that we have this program. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and can you explain to me what the money is for? You're talking about a first cost estimate of $245 and then $161. What is this money for, and who is it going to, and what are we getting for it?
So the cost impact is, and again, I'm pulling up the Enhanced Source Control Program section that specifically talks about funding and resources, and I'll give you a breakdown of the cost estimation. It really is, hold on real quickly. It really is broken down into staff time, and then laboratory fees are the two primary cost elements.
So it's city staff time, Eric?
That's correct. Yes.
And then lab testing that has to be done?
Yeah. So just to give you a sense, the first year is a little bit higher, primarily due to some additional personnel time for the setup of the program, and then some investment in some monitoring equipment. So as we mentioned, the first year is approximately $244,000, and the breakdown of that is about $165,000 for personnel, about $75,000 for monitoring equipment, and then about $4,000 for lab fees. And then that goes down in subsequent years because the monitoring equipment goes away and the staff time's a little bit lower, about $140,000 for staff, $15,000 for monitoring equipment, and $5,000 for lab.
Okay, that's a good answer. So Joe, right now By the way, I like your new haircut. Right now, are we permitting all the grease traps and so forth for the restaurants?
We don't issue permits. We actually just do inspections. So informally, we keep a list of all the restaurants based on business license, and then we set up an annual inspection and urge them to comply with pumping requirements of their grease trap. So this program will actually give some teeth and some procedures for us to follow if they don't comply. Fortunately, the majority of our community, our restaurant community, has just been great partners with us, and we really don't have very many problems at all. So, they work really well with us.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Penny, for the detailed report. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller. Councilmember Davis, questions or comments, sir?
Yes, the additional costs that you quoted, Eric, $165,000 initially and $140,000 annually thereafter. That sounds like one additional person on city staff. Is that correct?
I can take.
Sorry, I was muted. But yeah, go ahead, Joe, because I'm looking at the breakdown. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so how we developed those costs is we actually took a percentage of everybody's time and looked at the duties that potentially would be needed. So, and then we took the our fully burdened city rate and allocated that to the cost. So those costs are with benefits and everything. So there's a percentage of my time in there to oversee the permits. Majority of the time is for the field personnel to go out and do the inspections, but we also have some clerical work in there, some hours, and some finance staff. If you add it all up, it's probably close to, I'd say, probably close to a half of a person, maybe another full-time person. But since it's just a portion of everybody's day, it just do more with less. So, that's what we're hoping, that we have not identified an additional staff person to do this work, but we're looking at the whole wharf facility and IPR as a whole. And we feel that we're adequately staffed currently, and we're looking at the future that we can just absorb this additional time by not putting it all on one individual.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Addis, any questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, this is Anthony from AGP Video. I just had a quick suggestion. Penny, are you able to mute your microphone when you're not speaking, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
My main question that I already talked to staff about, and I think was already answered today, was about who this would affect and how they know, and what would that look like if we had to prosecute this to the fullest extent if there was an issue. But I feel like all of that has been answered now. Great.
Thank you. So that ends this agenda item. Thank you again, Penny and Eric and Joe for your input and the great overview. We'll look forward to seeing the ordinance when it comes forward, and we will have adequate time for obviously public comment because it will be two public hearings. So thank you. That moves us to item number 2. This was item 5 that we just completed. This is review and adopt draft funding recommendations for the 2021 Community Development Block Grant Program. And I'll turn it over to, let's see, either Mr. Collins or his designee.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we're going to have Cindy Jason, our senior planner, provide the presentation. Cindy.
Great, Cindy, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council and mayor. I'm going to take just a moment here to share my screen. And let's see. Oh, wait, hold on a second.
Perfect. We got it.
Okay, good. There we go. Okay, so this is for the City Council's consideration. It is an item to review and adopt draft funding recommendations for the Federal Community Development Block Grant Program for the 2021 program year. The city is a member of the Urban County Consortium, which in partnership with the county and most of the cities in the county allows for federal entitlement CDBG funding from U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Countywide, the allocation of funds for this year is approximately $1.8 million. The city's share of that is approximately $59,000, with about $42,000 carried over from the 2020 year. The funding allocation is an annual process whereby draft funding recommendations are made in the fall that get forwarded to the County Board of Supervisors, followed by final funding recommendations, which come early in the new year. And that happens after public comment and review. As described in the staff report, the city has not awarded funding since the 2016 program year because during that year, the council at that time approved accepting a multi-year advance of CDBG funds. This amount was approximately $236,000 and was used to fund the city's pedestrian accessibility sidewalk project. That project has since been completed and the funds have since been paid back. For this 2021 program year, we received 4 applications for funding. These were from People's Self-Help Housing, the San Luis Obispo Nonprofit Housing Corporation, 5 Cities Homeless Coalition, and Salvation Army. I have a table on the screen here which shows each of those applications with a brief project description. As you can see, the total amount requested exceeds the amount available to the city. Staff is recommending that the council fund the Morro Bay Family Apartments project by the SLO NP, the San Luis Obispo Nonprofit Housing Corp. Due to the limited amount of funding available to the city, the $89,000, and really to allow for greater benefit to the Morro Bay Family Apartment project based on its project readiness. That site is located at 405 Atascadero. It would also be the first affordable development for families built in the city of Morro Bay really since the 1980s. As I said, it already has its land use entitlements and will be developed as a tax credit project. Because of this readiness and the city's goals to support new affordable housing, staff is recommending that the City Council fund this project. Pursuant to CDBG funding criteria, there is a cap on maximum funding amounts. So should the council vote to approve other applications, either the People's Self-Help or the 5 Cities application, the city would be limited to awarding no more than 15% of its allocation toward public services, which equals just under $9,000, $8,979. As I said, based on city goals to support affordable housing and the shortage of existing affordable housing in the community, staff is recommending that the Morro Bay Family Apartment Project be funded for $89,766 to provide assistance for a new 35-unit affordable rental development, and the city administration at $4,190 for a total 2021 funding allocation of $93,956. And staff is also recommending that additionally that the council authorize the city manager to make any pro rata adjustments to the allocation based on final congressional approval and HUD budgetary changes that may occur. And with that, I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Very succinct, and thank you for the excellent staff report as well. Very clear. And thank you for including your slides in our packet. I always appreciate that. We'll go to council questions and or comments. I guess my only question would be, given the limited funds that we have utilized for assisting homeless programs in the past, their request of $900, and then also the request by PSHH for affordable existing rental development support services assistance of $8,631. In your discussion, did you consider maybe awarding those and awarding the 405 Atascadero project a lesser amount, and what was the rationale for not considering that?
Yeah, so we did weigh out the pros and cons of that in developing the staff recommendation. Really, where it came down to is that really the city has not, as I said, funded an affordable development or had new construction of affordable family housing since the 1980s. Tax credit projects are incredibly complicated in assembling multiple financing sources. And we really just wanted to give this project its best shot. I mean, there is the opportunity, the council could choose to peel away about $9,000 of that recommendation to the SLO NP, and they would have a corresponding lesser amount. And certainly that could be done. But really the thought process is it seemed prudent to give the apartment project its best shot.
And a follow-up question to that would be if we did decide to peel off the 9,500 or so, would that jeopardize a slow NP's potential funding of the project, or do you see a potential major impact if we made that move?
It's hard to say. I don't have their development budget on how tight they are. I did note that one of the applicants for that funding application is on the call, so they may be speaking at public comment, and they could presumably speak with that. I mean, it's likely that they are assembling, in the multi-million-dollar range to put together this project. But the funding also helps them, make sure that the project is a success.
Good. Thank you, Cindy. That's all the questions I had. I'll go to Councilmember Hiller. Sir, questions or comments?
All righty. Okay, thank you, Cindy, for that report. When did everything get so darn complicated between this and the enhanced source control program, last agenda item? I was going, wow, you guys have a lot of complicated things to deal with. So theoretically, with these grants, we can roll over the funds from year to year like Atascadero did, like we've done in the past. Is that true?
It is true to an extent. The dance with it all is that there are expenditure milestones that the county is subject to meet by HUD. And typically the county has always told us, every year, make sure that you're funding ready to go projects, that you can have timely expenditure of funds. The city has always done that. Then what happened in 2016 is that the county had approached the city and said that Atascadero had some projects that they thought were, shovel ready to go, and they turned out to not be able to meet those expenditure deadlines. And so worked it out that the city of Morro Bay had a ready-to-go project, and we basically did a three-way advance between ourselves, Atascadero, and the county. But normally, it was the first time that it had been done where they did this multi-year advance because it really depends on a lot of factors. And they had a good experience with it. They liked it, but it hasn't been done since.
Gotcha. Okay. The Mayor Heading asked a number of the questions that I was going to ask. I'd say in general, I think to your point, the family apartment project is a great project for Morro Bay. Very happy to see it moving forward. I think that services tends to get a little ignored, and I kind of would like to support the PSHH request, and as well as the rental payment assistance for homeless, the $900. I'm not so sure that I want to support the Salvation Army SLO for their 4 units for $300,000, but the other two, in addition to what the balance that's remaining, I frankly would like to support. So those are my questions and my comments rolled into one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hiller. Appreciate that. Councilmember Addis, comments, questions?
My main question is what would happen to the Atascadero project if any of these funds were to be split up. So maybe I need to hear that from public comment, but that would be my priority, would be to make sure that that project moves forward. But I tend to agree with Councilmember Heller. If we could allot $900 to the one agency and a few thousand to the other while still keeping the Atascadero project whole and able to move forward, I would lean that way. But at the end of the day, I don't want to jeopardize that Atascadero project at all. I think it's the right one for Morro Bay. So if we can spread the resources around, I would lean that way, but only if it doesn't jeopardize.
Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. And Councilmember Davis, questions, comments?
Yes. Do I understand that we are making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for the expenditure of these funds?
That's correct. It's a draft funding recommendation. So this will actually come back to your council again in likely January or February, whereby you will make a final funding recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. It is possible to change your funding recommendation. It hasn't happened with Morro Bay since we joined the consortium, but it is possible if matters change. But it is a draft funding recommendation.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I felt that it was important to clarify for the record that, because I didn't put this in my presentation, but it's in the staff report, that our cooperation agreement with the county requires that any funding recommendations or awards that the city makes, they have to be a minimum of $8,000. People's Self-Help meets that test. Five Cities Homeless Coalition doesn't. And the reason is that HUD does not want us funding projects that would cost more to administer it than what there would be actual benefit. However, I talked to the county folks on this, and what they advised is that if there are other jurisdictions in the county, if the city wanted to fund 900 to 5 cities, and if there is another city out there in the county that says, oh, well, we're going to fund 7,100, then it meets that 8,000 test. But if we are the only city in the consortium that says we want to fund 5 cities, then that would be a problem because it wouldn't meet that minimum $8,000 test.
What is the likelihood that the Board of Supervisors would change our recommendation? As long as we're consistent with the consolidated plan, which is based on, the needs assessment workshops and funding criteria, they typically do not change a local city's funding recommendations. It has not happened yet. Okay, thank you. And then my comment would be that my preference would be to put all of the money for the 405 Atascadero because it is so important to move our city's housing program forward. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Councilmember McPherson, comments, questions?
Yes, I did have some questions that I submitted to Cindy beforehand, and she was kind enough to answer them. But the one that I do want to ask yet concerns whether or not the services that People's Self-Help Housing provides to these 4 apartment complexes of low-income folks in Morro Bay would not be able to go forward next year unless we make this funding recommendation. So will the services stop being performed if we don't fund them?
They would not. So the services would continue. What that looks like is if People's Self-Help does not get funded to provide those services, they are existing services. They would continue to go forward. Essentially what happens is they have to seek funding from other sources or they supplement the cost of those services from other internal sources. As a nonprofit, they're always seeking grant funding. And when they don't get funded by one grantor, then they have to apply for grant funding to meet their needs somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. I think where I stand is I really believe that obviously the family apartment complex is the top priority, but I know how much more money they're going to need to raise, and I'm not sure that the $8,600 difference, if we were to fund people's self-help housing, would make that big a difference. So I guess I would support the People's Self-Help Housing Project and the balance to the family apartment at 405 Atascadero Road. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we have a mixed bag here. I could go either way. I do believe that the affordable housing project is extremely important to the city, but also recognize the excellent service that People's Self-Help Housing have provided to the community, and could and would support an allocation to them as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and just throw it out and entertain a motion. How's that? If not,
you have to have public comment, or
no? We took public comment for the special meeting at the very beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and from somebody from Catherine Manning made a comment from People's Self-Help Housing.
Okay, I move to adopt resolution number 9920, approving community development block grant funds in the amount of $89,766 for the Morro Bay Family Apartments, with program administration of $4,190 for a total funding allocation of $93,956, and authorize the city manager to make pro rata adjustments to the allocation based on the final funding amount from the San Luis Obispo County, based on the approval of the federal budget and HUD's final grant amount to the county.
And Councilmember Davis, did you say and adopt resolution 99-20?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'll second it. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Mayor, did Ms. Hudson said somebody was on the phone though that might be able to speak to the Atascadero project? Did I hear that wrong?
Well, I opened public comment in the meeting at the very beginning. And so okay. I hesitate to for one item because I'd be inconsistent, and I'd feel like I'd be remiss for the other items and not going back and opening it up again because it's standard procedure. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that recognition and letting me know about that.
So I have
I'm sorry.
Comments, if I might?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Okay, thanks. So obviously the family apartments is extremely important, but I really believe that considering the scale of the project, which is the tens of millions of dollars, certainly to develop that project, that $8,600 is not going to make the difference as to whether or not it succeeds or not. So I feel strongly that we need to support services in this city, and it's a big issue, I think, for a number of reasons. I don't know if we can amend it or do a friendly amendment if you just want to take a vote, but my position is we really need to take that 8637 and get it to people's self-help housing, and then give the balance to the apartment project.
Thank you, Councilmember Hiller. That it was a motion and a second, and what I would do is I would consider that motion, and if it failed, then I would go back and maybe suggest you make another motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great. And so any other comments? I wanted to keep it open if there were comments. If not, we'll do a roll call vote on the existing. Well, yes, go ahead.
I would support Councilmember Heller in bringing forward a different motion if we're not able to do a friendly amendment on this one.
Okay. And so go ahead, Councilmember McPherson, were you going to assist?
As would I feel strongly we need to support the People's Self-Help Housing Project.
So, Councilmember Davis, it sounds like the majority is looking for perhaps a withdrawal of the motion and a withdrawal of the second, and maybe reconsideration of your motion. If not, I'm happy to go ahead and move forward with a vote and perhaps entertain another motion if it fails. Your pleasure.
Based upon the discussion, I will withdraw my motion, or
and I'll withdraw my second.
Okay.
All right. Did you want to make another motion?
Yes, I'll make a similar motion. Yeah. I might need some help on the amounts of money. I recommend that we adopt Resolution 9920, approving funding recommendations for the 2021 Community Development Block Grant Funds, supporting both the Morro Bay Family Apartments Project and the People's Self-Help
housing.
Thank you. Housing request in the amounts that are listed in the staff report. And authorize the city manager to make pro rata adjustments to the allocation based on the final funding amount from San Luis Obispo County based on the approval of the federal budget and HUD's final grant amount to the county.
So that, Councilmember Davis, that would be $81,129 allocation to 405 Atascadero and $8,637, if my math is correct, to the PSHH.
Yes, thank you. That is my motion.
And I will second that.
Okay. Thanks. You have a motion by Councilmember Davis to change the allocations as noted and approve the resolution with those changes to include PSHH in the amount of $86.37 and 405 Atascadero in the amount of $81,129, seconded by Councilmember McPherson. Any further discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember McPherson?
Yes.
Councilmember Addis?
Yes.
Councilmember Heller?
Yes.
And Mayor Heading?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you for that robust discussion. I always appreciate that very, very much. With that will take us to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the 4th agenda item, actually. Adoption of resolution number 100-20, declaring gulls at Bayshore Village have become so numerous or destructive as to constitute a menace and danger to public health, safety, or property, and therefore providing an exemption from Morro Bay Municipal Code, Section 7.16025, authorizing the Homeowners Association to haze and harass gulls, to remove gull nests from their property, and to carry out addling of gull eggs. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Grant.
Thank you, Mayor Heading. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to share my screen here.
Certainly.
Okay, you should be able to see it now. So as was stated, the request by the Bayshore Village Homeowners Association to extend the 2015 council authorization to remove gull nests from the rooftops at the development. The authorization is also requested, they've also requested an expansion of that authorization to include harassment and hazing of gulls. What that looks like is they used, and I'm not exactly sure what all these things are, but wind-driven whirlybirds, solar-powered whirlybirds, metal spiders, spikes, bird wire, mylar tape, coiled wire around the chimneys, distress calls, plastic owls, green laser lights, and among other things, to harass and haze the gulls so they don't nest on the rooftops. And then, as was mentioned, the addling of the gull eggs, which basically is the cover. You cover them in corn or vegetable oil, and then replace them in the nests, soon after they're laid, and they won't then hatch. So the background, back in December 8th of 2015, the council adopted resolution 7615 that extended the gull nest removal authorization for an additional 5 years from the previous authorization. We've been doing this for about 10 years to this point. That authorization expires on December 31st of this year. Specifically, section 7.16025 of the Morro Bay Municipal Code grants council the authority by resolution to determine that wild birds have become so numerous or destructive to constitute a danger to public health or a public health hazard. Excuse me. Thereby allowing council to approve measures to address the issue. Specifically, the section is on the screen there from the Morro Bay Municipal Code under the molesting wild birds section and nuisance remedies of the code. It says, no person shall trap, shoot, hunt, molest, injure, or kill any wild birds, or tamper, damage, or destroy the nests or eggs of any wild birds within the city. Should the council determine by resolution that birds protected under this chapter have become so numerous or destructive in any particular location or area as to constitute a menace and danger to the public health, safety, or property, the council may provide such remedies appropriate under the circumstances. So that is the authority that grants the city, the council, the ability to waive the protection requirements for wild birds. A little bit of the background for the HOA at Bayshore Village is this has been ongoing for, again, over 10 years. One of the issues that's created is roof damage. In the picture on the slide there, you can see a lot of gull guano on the rooftops. Also becomes a health hazard in these locations and in and around the pool. So it is the reason they're requesting this authorization to move forward. The HOA is also required to obtain a predation permit from U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the addling of the eggs, the nest destruction, as well as the harassment of the gulls. They have obtained this authorization over the past 5 years. They have to get a new permit every year, and copies of those permits are included in your packet this evening. The recommendation from staff is that based on the fact that the issue has persisted for over 10 years and remains on site, city authorization is necessary to carry out the project, and the HOA cannot mitigate the impacts without city authorization. So the recommendation is to adopt resolution 100-20 declaring gulls at Bayshore Village exempt from Morro Bay Municipal Code section 7.16025 and allowing the mitigation measures as noted in the staff reports to move forward so they can address the gull issue on site. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Appreciate that presentation. With that, I will go ahead and either entertain a motion, comment, or questions from council, starting with Councilmember Addis.
Yeah, my main concern was about the practice of addling, but I looked it up and it's approved by the Humane Society, and I think somebody wrote in and asked us to please not kill any seagulls, and it seemed to me that this will not kill any seagulls, and that there's safe practices being used. I don't know if, I'm assuming the HOA has looked into having a falconer. I assume that's expensive. That would be my only sort of addition to this, is that I know falconers are, another alternative to keep gulls away that wouldn't add plastics into the environment from the mylar that I think does end up kind of separating and floating away. But knowing that the Humane Society supports this practice, I feel much better about this.
Thank you. Excellent comments. Councilmember McPherson.
Yes, thank you. Well, on many of my walks, I walk through Bayshore Village, and I do have to say that if they've been doing this for 10 years, it's not very effective. There's certainly many, many gulls in town. So I understand the practice, and I'm pleased to see that they don't destroy nests and instead simply prevent chicks from being born. So I would support this.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yes. I had the opportunity to tour Morro Bay High School several years ago during the campaign for the bond measure to upgrade the school. And the degree of destruction that we observed from the seagull infestation at the high school was horrendous. And I'm sorry that we have to resort to these measures, but certainly I understand the destructive result of seagull infestation, and so I'm going to support the request.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Heller, comments, questions?
Yeah. First off, let me just say, I think Alfred Hitchcock would definitely support this resolution. And this, I love this issue because, you know, when I was elected, I had no idea I would ever have something like this come before me. It's such a blue state issue. I just love it. And hazing and harassing, boy, those words are loaded, and yet apparently it's those are phrases used by Fish and Wildlife and other agencies. So, you know, to Don Addis's question, is the Falcon approach feasible or financially feasible for this particular situation? I don't know. And the other things that they're asking to do here, do they work? Are they going to work? I mean, I support the HOA in needing and wanting to deal with this issue. Whenever I walk in that area, I avoid it because, you know, for obvious reasons. So I support it. But I do have questions as to the effectiveness. And Scott, maybe you know the answer to those questions in terms of whether this will be effective or not.
I mean, obviously, the issue on site, you know, continues, and they've been dealing with it since the early 2000s. I think, you know, it's the harassment and those types of measures don't seem to work all that well. I think the addling of the eggs reduces, you know, the number of additional gulls in the area, and so that's one of the things that they do. I don't really have any comment related to the use of, you know, falconry or falcons, you know, to scare off the gulls. I'm sure that's one means of harassment that you could use. I don't know whether they've, you know, attempted to do that or not. I don't have that information. You know, one of the members from the Homeowners Association, Bill Albrecht, is on the call, but I mean, we said we already took public comment, so.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you. And go ahead, Councilmember Heller. Did you have another question?
No, those are my questions and sarcastic comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your subtle sarcasm. I can tell you personally, I was a former resident of the Bayshore condominiums. My wife and I recently moved away after living there for 4 years. It was an excellent experience for us, except for the seagulls. And I must tell you, what is done there is very respectful and compliant with all of the items that have been outlined in the report. It hasn't completely eradicated the issue, but I can tell you without it, it would be absolutely, well, in my opinion, humble opinion, unlivable because of the persistent, significant numbers of gulls. On the property itself, the mitigation did improve the grounds. which are rather vast, as you know, including a pool, clubhouse, and walking area that would be significantly impacted by the gulls. This, in my opinion, I do support it. I know that the HOA is very respectful of following the guidelines to the T, and I know from former discussions, I don't remember any recommendations coming out that were better than this in terms of other means to help mitigate the issue. So I too do support it, and I will go ahead and make the motion that we adopt Resolution 100-20, declaring the existence of gulls at the Bayshore Village condominiums that have become so numerous or destructive as to constitute a menace and danger to the public health, safety, or property, authorizing an exemption for Bayshore Village and Morro Bay Municipal Code, MBMBC, Section 0716025, and authorizing the HOA's request to haze and harass gulls, to remove gull nests from their property, and carry out addling of Western gull eggs.
I'll second.
Motion by Mayor Heading for the staff recommendation, second by Councilmember Heller. Any further comments or discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Heading?
Yes.
Councilmember Heller?
Yes.
Councilmember Addis?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
And Councilmember McPherson?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Great. Thank you for that. That brings us to item number 4, which is the 5th agenda item. Status report on the efforts to review and improve the planning development review process. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's make sure I get the right one here. Oops, wrong one. Well, let's try again.
That's good.
Technology, sometimes it works. Let's try again. You see that okay? Guess so. All right. Well, I'm here to present, as well as my co-presenter, Erica Crawford, Morro Bay Chamber CEO, on the review of our planning and development process. As City Council and community members are aware, and anybody who's tried to develop, whether it was residential or commercial in any community for that matter, the process to do that can be easy or very challenging in some cases, and can be aided or harmed by the efficiency or inefficiencies of a given system for how cities do that. The process itself can be very simple depending on the type of project, very elaborate and challenging and complicated. And it includes the submission of plans to the city by a resident or their representative, architect or developer. That includes, from that point, a review of the plans by city staff. That has planners, engineers, fire marshal, building inspector, plans examiners, et cetera, and depending on the city, maybe outside firms that do review as well. Then there's modifications to the plans, environmental review, depending on the level of development. And, and also the scope of the development, it may need a review by the Planning Commission. If there's an appeals, it can go to City Council. In the case of Coastal California, it could go from council to be appealed or brought directly to the California Coastal Commission or other outside agencies, depending on where you're located. Following that planning approval, then there's the building side of it, where building plans are submitted for construction. They're reviewed by staff, and then as the construction is occurring, building staff review each layer of development to ensure that the inspection, the codes are being met, to ensure the safety of those who are constructing and those who will occupy those buildings in the future. And depending on the type of project, it can take anywhere from a couple of weeks to several years to complete. So an efficient process can certainly help engender more development in a community, and an efficient one can create burdens whereby developers are concerned about risk, about predictability, and stability of the organization to ensure that their investments will see light at the end of the tunnel in the manner of a development. So it's really important that a city has a grasp of its process, understanding where there are areas of strength and weakness, ensuring that those who bring forward plans are well educated in how to do that, and also have a clear sense of how a process will be complete, and the fees and all those things are known at the beginning, and there are no surprises. That's sort of the ideal. Morro Bay City Council, understanding that key process and how important it is to our well-being, financially, economically, and otherwise, had made this a key action item when developing the 2019 and 2020 City Council goals. This fell under the financial and economic sustainability goal. So Council had directed staff to come up with some type of plan to review the planning and development review process. And we worked with the Chamber of Commerce, serving as our ombudsman or economic development ombudsman. Through that contract, they were requested to conduct or at least take part in this review of our planning process. And the Chamber more than did that. They did an excellent process in terms of looking at qualitative data on how our process works, where we have issues, and ultimately what our aspirations are in moving forward in the future, and looked at various levels of stakeholders, internal stakeholders, those on the outside who've done business with the city, whether they're developers or real estate agents or the like, and also checked in with the general business community to get a pulse of how things are going. And we're very thankful for those efforts led by Erica Crawford as the CEO, Chamber CEO. So I'm going to pause there on my presentation and ask that Erica be promoted to allow her to share her slides, and we'll come back to mine and then turn it over to Council for discussion.
Okay.
Erica.
Hi. Can everybody see that on the screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So thank you. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction, for presenting in this way. I'm going to take you through, it's just 10 slides, Council. We did submit a 14-page report to you. I'm going to start perhaps uncustomarily, I'm going to start with the last slide. Some of the data that we unearthed, or the information that we unearthed and then that we found, I want to make sure that the Council knows that we can easily fix this. These are not uniquely Morro Bay problems. Having perhaps a permit process that could be improved upon is a problem that can be fixed and that is experienced in municipalities everywhere. So I want to make sure that as I present this, sort of keeping in mind that change does take strength of leadership, takes breadth of influence and consistency or persistence. Some of the things that we've been thinking of as we prepared this report, and the recommendations at the end, keep it simple. This is an easily fixable problem. Keep it simple. Measure it. Make sure that you know what your baselines are and how you're moving toward goals. Don't just set the goal, but measure as you accomplish, get to yes. This is, I think, a customer service mantra and it's sort of a mindset culture. And vet proposed improvements. Don't do this in a vacuum, I think, is our recommendation. So although Scott did a great preamble, just as a reminder, City Council Goal 4 implementation item number 1 was to review and make improvements where feasible to the permitting process. The Council in April of 2020 renegotiated reworked our scope of services for our economic development contract, and we included this work in that contract. So our methodology, we surveyed your customers. We didn't go out and survey a bunch of disgruntled customers. We got a list of customers. We kind of worked in collaboration with your community development department, with a few people who are local who knew of customers. So we reviewed with developers, and their agents, real estate brokers and their agents, and the representatives who had done projects in the city in the last 5 to 10 years. We then went on to survey our service providers. So these are city staff people themselves. We sent a survey link to the city council itself and planning commission. And then we went on and surveyed community leaders. These are people who are involved in the local community who serve on advisory boards. So we did send this to, PWAB, CFAC, TBID, Harbor Advisory Board. And then we kind of went non-governmental and pulled in a few people from Mabosa, the Friends of the Harbor Department, just to kind of cast a wide net of community leadership. So we got above a 50% response rate in each of those segments. And our next step was just, review the results. There were some open-ended questions in the surveys. And so we pulled in some of those more narrative responses into recommendations, and we reviewed the survey results with our GAC, our Governmental Affairs Committee, but we also invited some people in to participate in that discussion, one of whom was a gentleman who was sort of instrumental in the transformation that Paso recently went through. And that's actually where I got the strength. He said transformative change in Paso happened thanks to strength of leadership, breadth of influence, and consistency. One of the things as we've gone through this, because you'll recall we started this in July, August, our first step was to present a draft report to staff. And that's been, I think, one of the more powerful steps or sort of uncustomary. You're seeing this now months later, but in fact, I've worked with your city manager and with your community development director on these recommendations, on the data and on what it says, to sort of seek alignment or to try and understand where we are. So let's go into the a little bit more contextual. Scott did a good job with this. Just to remind us why this is important, what or who our customer is, what are investors seeking. These individuals are looking for predictability in their processing of a development permit because it's a significant risk factor for their investment. In the absence of any kind of confidence that a permit can be secured in some sort of a predictable way, that high risk may give them cold feet. They may look elsewhere. So what are investors seeking? It's adequate and certain return. They want to put capital in projects where there's potential for an adequate return and a relative certainty. Nobody can read the tea leaves. Nobody knows the future, but they want to be relatively certain that they'll make a return on their investment. As we reviewed the methodology, the report, the recommendations, there was a discussion about why did you use Net Promoter Score? Why are you using consumer satisfaction? We're a municipality, we're a public agency. So I wanted to address that a little bit. The reason that perception is important and the reason that a Net Promoter Score, what people believe about you is important, especially here, is because the pool of investors in our region is pretty small. They have finite resources, and they're navigating their way around our hopefully now super region, and they're looking for investment opportunity. Knowing how Morro Bay compares to other jurisdictions in the county, which is where we looked, is important. It'll allow us to understand how we stack up and how competitive we are. We compared, we asked these survey respondents to compare Morro Bay to other jurisdictions. These other jurisdictions, like Morro Bay, are also regulators. Every community has a coastal commission. We happen to have the coastal commission, but certain municipalities have an airport control district, or they have some special thing that makes it that can complicate projects. So just a word on Net Promoter and why perception is important is because your reputation does precede you. So I just kind of wanted to give you that preamble. Now let's look at some of the results. So about 5 slides. What you're looking at here, the 4 bars if you're looking at the screen to the left, starting with the bluer color, you're looking at service providers and community leaders on the 4 bars on the left, both goals and their actuals. So what we asked service providers and community leaders to answer was, how are you doing now? What's your current level of providing a service, and what do you aspire to? What's your desired level? The two bars on the right-hand side are your customers, divided between developer agents and broker agents. So for this first question, we're looking at the question, are in your experience or as a service provider, are staff supportive or receptive to your concerns? All of the respondents in the survey, all of the segments, rated current service levels below supportive. But the service providers and community leaders both aspire to be very supportive. So I think that that's a bright spot, that there's a desire for improved level of service and support. It doesn't mean that there isn't support now. It just means that there's room for improvement. Is staff helpful in expediting permitting? Again, the customers and community leaders rated staff below helpful. Service providers or the staff do aspire to be very helpful. So again, an aspirational goal to improve. This question, is Morro Bay a politically stable community? Just to note, these surveys were conducted pre-election, so this was in July and August. That said, approximately all of the respondents answered that Morro Bay was a fairly politically stable community. And service providers and community leaders aspired to be a more stable. I put, they aspire to excellence, someplace between good and excellent. The next question, are there opportunities for new development in Morro Bay? All respondents hovered around fair. Now, we know, I certainly know, your staff knows that there are opportunities for development in Morro Bay. We discovered them through the Economic Development Strategic Plan, the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan. There are opportunities here, but all respondents are saying that it's only a fair opportunity. But our service providers, community leaders aspire to be an excellent opportunity for new development. So that gap and that context just begs the question, is there a dearth of opportunity for development in Morro Bay, or is there sort of a disconnect or a dearth of effective marketing about the opportunity that we have, or are we not creating buzz that we are a place to do business? Which leads to the final question, is Morro Bay business friendly? And our customers, the surveyed, and the service providers appear from these statistics presented to say, no, we are not. But the service providers and community leaders aspire to yes. So we'll just complete my part of the presentation as your contracted, report preparer. Some recommendations of what could be done about it, and how, and I would recommend all of these things City Council consider immediate actions. So there could be a permit requirements checklist for every type of project prepared so that applicants can self-certify their compliance with city regulations and establish a timeline for each permit type. I'm just going to move my screen. You could promote staff level pre-planning meetings with applicants. I do know that this happens from time to time, but it could become something that's institutionalized. The reason this is important, I think, is because some of the feedback we have heard is that applicants come unprepared or underprepared, or the quality of plans that are being submitted, that there's room for improvement for that. So I think having the recommendation is that having a permit requirement checklist for project types and having these pre-planning meetings can better prepare your customers to have success at your counter. Commencing a permit processing benchmark study, and we are offering to be partners in that, could then be established to figure out, okay, so we know our permit requirement checklist for project types. There's an established timeline for each permit type. And now how does that stack up with our competitive set in the county? Back to that, I'll say it the third time, the strength of leadership, having City Council formally adopt a resolution, and it could be to establish performance metrics desired for processing, and it should include maybe approving a work program for improvement that includes measurement. establishing a stakeholder or focus group of permit customers to provide feedback in real time to city staff as improvements are being proposed and implemented is really important to prevent any of this work, being done in a vacuum. Your customers will be able to, and this is something that was used in past rules, I think, as well, give you feedback. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would that make it faster? Would that make it clearer? So that you can vet those improvements as they're being implemented or proposed. Publishing a completion schedule for the general plan and LCP update. I feel for you, Scott Graham is going right into a planning commission meeting after this for a third meeting on the general plan draft is excellent. The chamber is very interested in seeing the GPLCP get updated, especially because we hear your staff at times say that getting a development project through or even kind of having a developer try to figure out what they could or couldn't do in our community just by looking at plans online is next to near impossible because our codes and things are so sort of out of date and there are so many gotchas in it. So clearing that up, I think we've talked about this, should have a positive impact on efficiency for your staff to be able to work more efficiently with your customers. And I think rewarding and recognizing staff contribution to this yes, we can workplace culture, getting to yes, and then really recognizing and I've just started to get to know the DNT team. These are incredible people and making sure that they are being rewarded and recognized for the times when they have a client, in front of them and okay, that's the path you have to take. And it's very convoluted and it's challenging. There are all these roadblocks, but don't worry, we're going to get you there together. We'll take your hand. We're going to walk you through it. And it's not, I'll meet you on the other side. We're going to go through together. So those are our immediate recommendations. And that is really all I prepared. I'm going to hand it back over to Scott, but I'm going to stay on the call if you guys have any questions. Thank you.
All right, Erica, possible for you to stop sharing screen? Awesome, thank you.
Got it.
Perfect, all right. All right, back to my presentation. First, I want to thank Erica for just being an excellent partner in this and having some of those hard conversations when results were received and really good discussions about what they mean and maybe don't mean and where to go from those results and really build towards something we can all be proud of. First, I want to acknowledge that based on some of those conversations, we already have put some of the recommendations in play. And the first is, it has been under a lot of effort and work by the planning department is the General Plan Local Coastal Program update. As Erica mentioned, and you've heard from Scott Graham, our current GP, LCP, and zoning code are in a lot of ways indecipherable and over 1,100 pages and a lot of conflicting information. And that's why, previous councils have made moving this forward a new Plan Morro Bay a top priority. Of course, completing that work and narrowing the 1,100 pages down to 300 pages and ensuring that we connect to our community's goals and values, as well as the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act, ensuring that we comply with that is a massive undertaking. So we are sort of reaching the terminus of this by having our Planning Commission review it. That's after many rounds of review by them and by our government. We had a community group that formed to look at this, and we've had several rounds of review by Coastal Commission. We're getting closer to the end. We hope to bring this forward to City Council in early 2021 and hopefully complete the entire process next calendar year. And then as we're completing that, also initiating the zoning code, which is the implementation of the GPLCP. I know it's a lot of words and it doesn't have a lot of meaning when we speak in generalities, but ultimately this is a huge deal because it will make it easier for staff, make it much easier for those out in the community who are looking to develop here, whether it's simple remodels of their home all the way up to commercial development. So we are optimistic that we're moving in a good direction. We'll have that complete in next calendar year. The next is we really do have a committed planning staff, and that planning spans the community development department, the fire department, and the public works department, and sometimes harbor in my office as well, and of course city council and the planning commission. We're really all involved in this process. But I'd like to thank those who are intimately involved. Scott Graham, kind of leader of that, Cindy Jathens, Pan Newman, Pam Bruno, Chad Omit, Matt Vieira, Nancy Hubbard, Gina Rares, Abby, our intern, and Rob Leivik, and I'm sure I'm missing some others, who are dedicated to ensuring that we not only protect our community by upholding the important codes established for our state and local, but also meeting the needs of our customer. And we've engaged in some initial team building and development of mission statements. We call it the why. Why are we here? Why do we exist? What are we trying to achieve? And come up with a statement around that I feel, while general, it's meaningful. They spent a lot of time coming up with this, and ultimately the statement is we are responsive and dedicated to the needs of the community for a safer and resilient Morro Bay. So there's two parts to that. It's the customer, but it's also the end product, which is ensuring that we develop in a way that meets the needs of our community and our safety is ensured. So this team has already committed to themselves to this. I see that as a good first step. I know that they care about the end product. I know they care about the customer. So we're going to continue to work on that team building, and also take that and turn it around and help those who are on the other side of the counter feel a part of the team too, because we're all in this together. We've included Erica in our regular development review team meetings. This is the team I mentioned the names earlier. They meet once a week to review projects in the pipeline, to go over issues, ensure that there's coordination across the various reviews of this, whether it's planning or fire or public works or some other issue. We're all on the same page, and that helps ensure that issues are flagged early on in the process. Moving forward into the other sets of recommendations, I've sort of outlined what I think are the key pieces to take on first. It's somewhat sequential. As Erica mentioned, we do need to ensure completion of the general plan local coastal program. There's a little bit of fluidity in this, and that we can't predict government bodies and how long it will take them to review, and whether there's going to be changes based on those reviews. Planning Commission's already on their third review, or will be tonight, and we expect several more. So that how long that takes, we can't predict, but we have some level of certainty that next year will be the year to complete this process. While it's important to have qualitative data via the survey and a great starting point, I think we all really need to recognize that we don't necessarily know exactly how well we perform when it comes down to the actual measurements, the time it takes. And so we want to conduct a quantitative analysis of our process. And while doing so, also conduct an internal review of that process while we're also measuring how long it takes. Are there handoffs that maybe are unnecessary or duplicative, or are there other processes we need to consider to ensure that we're doing this right and doing it effectively? And this is something that Scott Graham had conducted while he was working for the city of Pismo Beach. We have a lot of other examples to draw upon locally. Paso Robles was mentioned. The city of SLO went through a similar process several years ago. So we definitely have local experts we can draw upon, but we believe it's important for the team who does this work on a daily basis can reflect inward and see how we can make process improvements. In doing that, we also need to evaluate our resources. We're down 2 folks on the planning team. We lost 1 planning person, and we've held that position vacant to help with COVID-19, and we also eliminated another engineering position, which is important for the process. So we need to evaluate whether staffing is at the optimal levels, or if we have the right technology in place. We want to make sure we're evaluating that as we go. Education of staff and training of staff, but also those on the other side of the counter, make sure we're all on the same page, making sure make it as easy as possible for them. As Erica mentioned, that could include things like one sheet for various types of projects, and it's very clear kind of what the steps will be moving forward. I think we can achieve that as we develop or complete our review of our internal processes and really figure out how we want to segment out the various project types, make sure it makes sense to the end user. And with that in mind, we want to establish a working group of local architects, contractors, developers, et cetera, those who we engage with on a regular basis, who can review the process alongside us, and we can talk about various improvements and check with them to see if these make sense and get their input as we go. So it's a very iterative thing, and it's not let's complete the entire thing and then go out to the world and say, how are we doing? We might miss a lot of stuff in the interim, so we want to bring them into the process. Goes without saying that we need to work very closely with the chamber and the Government Affairs Committee on these efforts. Again, is an important end user, but also a reflection of if there are improvements being made and are they being felt out in the community. And last, I think it'd be important, as Erica mentioned, this process really encompasses the entire city, from the line staff all the way up to city council. And so it's important that or consideration for council to adopt a resolution in the near future that talks about our commitment to continuous process improvement. We definitely understand this is a goal for council anyhow, and having a resolution sort of puts it out to the world that that's our commitment and something we can report on an ongoing basis to make sure we're hitting the high marks and the expectations of council. So with that, we would recommend the city council discuss what's been presented tonight and what you observed in the chamber report that was attached to the staff report, and provide feedback on what I just shared with you, which I think are the kind of key next steps, and check in and make sure those are right for you as council members. And if there are other things we should include doing immediately, we need to hear that from you and any other input you may have to offer tonight. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I also thank Erica so much for her help in this.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Erica, very much for an excellent staff report and a comprehensive presentation. I especially want to thank the Chamber Government Affairs Committee for a tremendously comprehensive report that was included in the packet. I know that this is perception, and that's understood, but perception is reality to those customers that we all deal with in the city. And I know that sometimes when we get these kinds of reports that show significant opportunities for improvement, it can be my term kind of a downer for us all. But the way I view it is this allows for the identification of being even better than we already are. So I guess I'm very encouraged by what I've seen, that there are opportunities for improvement that directly connect to economic development for the future, and the improvement in revenue streams if you're able to move these initiatives forward. I thank you, Mr. Collins, for interpreting the Chamber's report and taking immediate action along with Mr. Graham and his staff, and coming up with recommendations that seem to parallel the recommendations that were made by the Chamber. So all of that said, thanks for the spirit of acceptance of the information, the willingness to move forward with proceeding to make improvements. And this should be the mantra of all departments in the city. That is one of continuous improvement. We're never perfect. There are always opportunities for improvement. And this is just another one of those that I think could bring big rewards to the city. So I'm just opening with that commentary. I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, or anything that you may want to recommend in addition to what's been recommended by staff. And I will go ahead and start with Council Member Davis, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to add one additional name to the list of leaders who have brought us to this point, and that's Dr. Robert Teft. Dr. Teft chaired the Planning Commission for many years. He also chaired the General Plan Advisory Committee. Councilmember Heller and I both had the pleasure of serving on that committee with Dr. Teft. And it was Bob Teft who persuaded the GPAC and then the council to add $100,000 to the budget for the general plan update to update the zoning code. And he, from his experience on the Planning Commission, he told us many times the zoning code that we had was so old, so amended and outdated, it was almost impossible to develop anything in Morro Bay. And so I want to acknowledge Dr. Teft, first of all. Certainly, I want to thank Erica for her work and also the GAC. This is going to be one of the most important activities that our city takes on to help lead us to future success. I have 5 things that I will look for in a resolution for staff to bring back to us. One of those is complete buy-in by the staff, and the indication that I got from Erica's presentation was that we have that. Our staff wants to be helpful and to get the job done and to help our customers. Second, we need to have clearly defined goals and objectives. We need to have a vision of what success looks like. We need a plan of actions and outcomes with a timetable. And we need to have follow-up and feedback on measurable outcomes. So I want to thank staff, council, chamber, all of us working together. I know we're going to have a successful outcome to this endeavor. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis, and thank you for the recognition of Dr. Bob Teft and all of the work that he did for our Planning Commission, and thank you for that. Councilmember McPherson, please. Comments, any questions or comments?
Thank you. I had a few questions and I had them answered beforehand. So let me just make a few comments. I really want to thank the Chamber for all of their work on this. It's a much needed project and I'm glad, nobody wants to hear bad news and nobody likes to be criticized, but I'm really so proud of the fact that this was a collaborative effort and that the staff is willing to tackle the problems in the process head on and with a very professional can-do attitude and a desire for improvement. And I know that the Chamber will work closely with the staff in implementing the recommendations. Initially, when I saw the Chamber's recommendations, I thought, oh my gracious, there's 24 of them. How can we really do all these things? And I'm pleased to see the list of priorities that Scott presented, which I totally concur with. And my expectation would be that when this resolution comes forward for the council, future council, and in the goal setting process, an action plan will actually be developed so that we can see how this process is going to be carried out and continued. So I'm just very appreciative of everybody that's been involved with it so far and looking forward to see how it all comes out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McPherson. Councilmember Addis, questions or comments?
I find this process exciting, and I know I'm not the one that has to implement, but I think one of the most important things you can do is address culture in one of the, in an organization. I think it's one of the hardest things to wrap your arms around is how to address culture. And I think between the GAC, the Chamber, Erica's work, Scott's work, everybody, staff's work, all of staff's work on this, you've been able to really pinpoint things that are doable, that are changeable, and that will make an improvement for Morro Bay. So I'm excited because it's this kind of thing that people tend to point out most about government is culture issues, and it's the kind of thing that we absolutely can change now that we have a pathway forward. So I just want to commend you, and I'd like to support what Councilmember Davis said about the 5 different things that he would like to see in a resolution that comes back. I think those are well thought out, and I could support that.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Addison. Thank you for those comments on culture. And Councilmember Heller, sir, questions or comments?
Yes, I like Don, I'm extremely excited about this. I think there's a tendency to make this kind of a grueling exercise when really it's an exciting opportunity to work together and collaborate. I think the key to success in these kinds of attempts is to recognize kind of the environment, which is from a developer standpoint. I've developed some small projects in my career. The fees are always too high, and it always takes too long to get a permit. And it's going to be hard to convince me otherwise, no matter how low the fees are or no matter how quickly I can get them. So I think that's kind of the business community perspective, which is going to always be that, and that's okay. From the staff's perspective is, hey, I'm working as hard as I can, as fast as I can. I've had to lay off people, and now you want me to do even more and attend meetings and make these changes? So I'm concerned that this just is more work for staff to do in order to accomplish this goal. So I'm concerned about that and what that's going to look like. The other perspective I'd like to try and bring to this is that very often the best ideas come from the people who do the work. So I hope that however this is structured and goes forward, that Scott Graham and his people are the experts. And if anybody knows how to do things more efficiently and more quickly and still be legal, because we don't want to just not check all the boxes that we have to legally check, and there are tremendous number of boxes, and they're growing every day. The best solutions, I believe, will come from Scott and his team. So let's be sure we really empower them and respect them and look to them for the answers, because I believe they will have the best ones. The amount of work that I would like to do to help is to, if we need help in looking at other communities and how they have expedited and changed their processes, I'm willing to spend time to help with that. I don't want to burden the staff with anything more than just being active, positive participants and leaders in this effort. They will lead us to the best processes. I really believe that. It's a very exciting time. As one of you mentioned, I don't remember who it was. I guess it was you, John. The whole city needs to look at how we do business and the process, hopefully, that we learn from and move forward with in planning department. Maybe we can apply to all of our departments. We're all challenged at this time to do things in a different, better, more efficient way. This is a great opportunity. I'm so excited. Any way I can help, I'm willing to help. And thank you for moving this forward. Erica, the work that you've done is tremendous. Your GAC has been tremendous and amazing input. And Scott Collins, thank you for your leadership on this as well. Super important, very exciting. Very happy to see it.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller. Well articulated, well stated, and I couldn't agree more. I literally support all the comments that were made. Councilmember Davis's 5-part plan. I agree with what he said. Complete staff buy-in, clarified, defined goals and objectives, or clearly defined goals and objectives. Establish a vision. have an action plan with outcomes, and there needs to be follow-up and accountability. Councilmember McPherson concurs with the staff priorities as well as myself, and she also mentioned the action plan that needs to be developed. Councilmember Addis, your comments regarding culture, I think, are just right on. And cultural transformation in organizations is always difficult, no matter what the organization, whether it's a public entity or a private company or even a small family business. But it can be done with buy-in, leadership, and accountability. And I believe we have all the tools, and I'll get to Councilmember Heller's comments. Jeff, I think you nailed it by saying we've got great leaders in Mr. Graham and his staff. This kind of information can be, I think, daunting and depressing, but I don't see it as that. I see what you see, and that is a tremendous opportunity. And we can come out of this not only better and greater, but we can improve the success for the overall community with regard to our planning processes and future economic development. So I just want to say job well done, Chamber. Again, I'm just going to repeat. Man, when I look at that comprehensive analysis and write-up that you did, tremendous. I appreciate it. But I also appreciate the spirit of the Chamber, not controversial, but collaborative and informative and what I'll call assistive. And I look forward to that continued collaboration with our business community to make this happen. So please, Erica, extend our thanks to the GAC and your board for the work that the Chamber continues to do in partnership with the city. I'm just so pleased to see that continue to happen and that partnership blossom. And lastly, the only thing I would add, besides my thanks to Mr. Collins again for his leadership as our city manager in articulating this in a report, and also Mr. Graham, thank you for your spirit and your spirit of a desire to continuously want to improve and provide superior customer service. I think that's what it's all about, and what the community, business community, and what everybody's looking for, not only from the city, but in any business that we interact with. The only thing I would add is that I think we need to do this in a timely fashion. I wouldn't like to see this lag. I think this is extremely important. We've established it about a year ago as a major goal. And so I won't lay down timelines, but I think moving this forward as expeditiously with the caution that Councilmember Heller gave with regard to not wanting to overtax our resources that we know right now, especially during the pandemic, are very limited, and everybody's kind of stretched to the max. I know taking on something like this is difficult, but I do think timeliness is important, and I'm looking forward to the resolution that will come according to the report at the next meeting. So with that, we have received the report, and I believe, Mr. Collins, do you have adequate direction from your council?
Absolutely, and appreciate all the comments and support for our staff who are working really hard, as well as Erica. Definitely been very collaborative, which can be contentious, has been absolutely collaborative and you know, a good model, and appreciate the comments about looking at other systems within the city. It's one as she goes, so we don't overwhelm ourselves, but it definitely can be a blueprint for other evaluations. But I do have the good solid direction from the five of you. I will caveat that by saying I shouldn't have said the next council meeting. I meant to say we will come back soon. The next meeting is more of the ceremonial meeting, but definitely in January, we were able to put a little bit more thought into hitting those 5 benchmarks that Mr. Davis outlined, which are really helpful.
So I was going to schedule a special meeting for next week and maybe have...
Okay, done. Already written.
That's good. Well, good. Thank you, Scott, for that. Again, thanks for all your work. And Mr. Graham is still here. And thank you, sir. or maybe he's gone to the Planning Commission to get ready for the Planning Commission meeting, but extend our thanks to Mr. Graham as well, and we'll look forward to hearing back from you. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. The next meeting of the Morro Bay City Council will be on December the 8th, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. I personally wanted to wish you all a very happy and safe Thanksgiving holiday. Remember, we're in the midst of a rising pandemic that in our county has moved us into the highest tier, unfortunately, just yesterday. So please be safe and be well out there. Practice social distancing, hand washing, and limit yourself to no more than gatherings of 3 individuals, even during this holiday season. Look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good holiday.
You too.
Be safe.